heard many things about change. We think of the new year starting and we think, oh, we're going to do so many different things. With us today is a young person who has really done something different. And with her is the representative of the group who made it all possible. Our guests are Julie Forster, who was the recipient of a marvelous opportunity through the Rotary Club, which Tom Dersing represents. We're delighted that both of you could be here with us.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Julie, we think of many different exciting things, particularly in the foreign exchange program, and, you know, we kind of take them for granted, but yours was very unique. Could you tell us where you went and how long you were there?
I was in Japan for a year, and I was on the island of Kyushu, which is the southernmost island of Japan, in a small city of Kurume. Actually, it wasn't that small. And I lived with 4 families there.
Good heavens, Julie. I mean, when you talk about a foreign exchange, I would say that's quite an exchange. How did this all come about? Did you say the right word or answer the correct question?
It was one of the, at the same time I was applying for college, for colleges, and it was an application process, and it was one of the longest applications I had. I felt like I was writing a book. And they asked you questions that you just, like, do you share a bathroom with anyone, or do you, I mean, it's just kind of a long list of questions to find out how well you would adapt.
Julie, backtrack for a minute. When you said you filled out this application, it wasn't with the school, though, was it?
No, it was a Rotary application.
How did you hear about it?
Well, I'd been looking into exchange programs, and I went to the counseling center at school, and I got a book that had over 100 exchange programs, and Rotary was in one of them, and I knew that we had a Rotary in Grosse Pointe.
Ah.
And I knew that Noel Berry, the year before me, was in Japan also. So then I called Mr. Dersing and got an application.
And this application was really, it taught them a lot about you and what you were willing to put up with. Is that kind of what you had the feeling?
Well, I remember when I was filling it out, I didn't understand why they were asking the question. And I kept asking my mom, why are they asking these questions? Why do they care if I've shared a bathroom with someone or not?
I don't even remember that question.
She pointed it out to me that it was just to see, you know, your limits and where they could put you, because if they put you in a very small house with a lot of people, how you would deal with that.
Right. You know, when this finally came about that you were going to Japan, were your parents rather surprised? Or, you know, let's say instead of England, I mean, here, that's quite a distance.
To say the least, yeah. Except in their case, it was kind of instead of college, it was, you want to go do what?
To where?
But, yeah, I remember my parents saying, but that's so far away. I said, well, you won't see me that year anyway. It doesn't really matter how far away. So, well, I guess you're right. But, yeah, I think, but I chose Japan basically because after the experience, I think I could still benefit from it because it's just the up-and-coming language, and our relations with them are improving so much that I think they were pretty happy with my choice.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. You know, Tom Dersing, Julie told us that Rotary made this possible. First, let's ask, let's ask first, what is Rotary, other than they've really made the news recently in advertising the fact that their membership is now open to women. But I guess what I'd like to know is, what is Rotary, and what is their purpose for existing?
Well, Rotary is a service club, as is Kiwanis and the Lions Club. I'm not sure, but I think it may be the oldest. It had its beginning in 1905 in Chicago, and it's now grown to a point where there are 20,000 Rotary clubs in the world, in 160 countries. That's all of the free world. Even Afghanistan had them until the Russians moved in. So it is a very widespread organization, and it's predicated on the ideal of service above self, so that we, on a local level, raise money and put it back into our community. And it also fosters world understanding, what we can all do in enhancing that area, and high ethical and standards in business and professions. So
that's really a noble...
That's basically what Rotary is, and it's, as they say, 1 million members, 20,000 Rotary clubs, 160 countries, and something that's almost 85 years old.
You know, now you mentioned about raising money and putting it in, back into the community in a service organization and you didn't mention this, but I would think it's like forming an esprit de corps among professional men and women.
Mm-hmm.
Under what criteria, then, was Julie selected to have this opportunity to study in Japan? Do you have some kind of a scholarship program, or?
No, it's open to anyone who is either a junior or a senior or would have just graduated from high school. The criteria is such that when they leave to spend this year-long experience as a Rotary Exchange student, they are between the age of 16 and a half and 18. Or maybe it's 16 and 18 and a half, but whatever, it's in that range. And they make applications, and they're interviewed on a local level, and if the reasons for being an exchange student are the kind we feel are right, then they're passed on, the application is passed on to the district, the Rotary district of which we're a part. Some 47 Rotary clubs make up our district. And then they go before an evaluating team along with their parents, and the decision is made. It so happens that the year that she went, there were 4 others went, and Grosse Pointe Rotary in our district is the most active of all in this particular program.
Julie, that's really a singular honor then. I didn't realize, I thought it was strictly based on the Grosse Pointe Rotary. I didn't realize it was the district.
Right.
Now, Mr. Persing, what is your place in all of this? I mean, were you working with Julie, or what was your responsibility?
Well, for the last 9 years, I've either been the chairman or the co-chairman or on the committee.
9 years.
and it really started because our son, I've been a Rotarian for a long time, but our son made application and went to Cuernavaca, Mexico, his junior year in high school when he was at Grosse Pointe South. So that got me involved, and I've still been involved.
And you've just stayed right with it,
Yeah,
and
I
probably
really
enjoyed it, huh?
And I think it does a great deal in furthering world understanding through youth, and I think it's one of the most important aspects of Rotary.
What I want to ask Julie next, I mean, here I'm sitting here thinking that not only were you far from home, but you were also in a totally different culture. And then you mentioned right at the beginning of the program that you were on an island in a smaller community. I mean, I guess I thought you'd be right in the heart of things, like in Tokyo.
Well, some students were placed in the heart of Tokyo. I don't know why I was placed where I was. I'm definitely grateful that where I was placed, because it was near Tokyo. It's a lot more westernized, whereas when you move away from Tokyo, it's more to the true culture and the older styles.
You mentioned that, did I understand correctly, that it was 4 families?
Yeah, it was.
Now, were these English-speaking Japanese?
Well, my first host father was the only person who spoke Japanese, and I was with him for 2 months.
English?
English. They all spoke Japanese. Yeah, my first host father spoke English, and that was good, because I was with him for 2 months. He kind of broke me in, and but after 2 months, I was pretty much ready to move, because I didn't like to speak English. Because you couldn't speak English all the time here. So from then on, the rest of the families didn't speak English, which was great for me, because you learn a lot more when they have to explain meanings of words to you in Japanese, like what is that, and they have to try and. It's just, I think that was great.
You know, Julie, I guess, well, first I should ask you, had you had Japanese, had you studied Japanese before?
No.
Then I'm thinking the second thing is, once you got over there, had you prepared yourself totally for this type of a change in your life? I mean, where you would be strictly on your own. You would not have a parent to go to or a relative and say, hey, I'm lonely, because I would think that you would become lonely, whether you were living with 4 families or no one.
It did get, it got very lonely at times, but, it wasn't like you couldn't do anything about it, so you couldn't dwell on that. And there was really nothing, I don't think there was anything I could do at that time to prepare myself, because I really didn't understand what I was getting into.
Right.
Which is good, because I didn't go in with expectations. I went in.
Or fears, really.
Yeah,
right?
I was too naive to fear or expect anything, so I just went in.
Of youth.
So, I didn't expect anything at all, and I think that was good, that I was not prepared.
Tell us about your families that you lived with and about their environment and what your impressions were of the Japanese people and the community you were in.
All my families were very different in a standpoint of wealth. My first family wasn't so wealthy, and it kind of progressively got wealthier, whereas my third family was very wealthy, very westernized, and but they were all very different. They were all, I think that they really chose them because they were all very different people. The only family that I had children with that were my age was my fourth family. I had a sister my age, which was really fun, which I had a great time in that house. But they were all just really kind people, and I learned so much from every single one, because when you change families, the first move was the hardest, just because you're so attached to these one people, these two, because I had my parents, and you're so attached to these two people, the only people you really know in that country, and then you're moving again. Mm-hmm. And so that was really hard, but once you got used to the move, it was fine, and I really appreciate that I did have an opportunity to live with 4 families, because they were very different people, and I learned so much from each one of them.
Was this all on that same island, or did you move
it was all within the same city because I was going to school.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
So I had to stay within that, within the parameter of the school district.
Rotary has felt that by having 2 or 3 or 4 families, they get a better look at the country and the variations, if you can imagine, in our own community, how families vary.
That's
so
right.
It is one of the things that we feel broadens the experience.
Mm-hmm. Julie, when you were in this community, were you accepted by the Japanese youngsters, and how was their English?
It took a while you were always looked upon as the American. They really look up to you. And
with her blonde hair.
Yeah, I didn't fit in. Physical characteristics, I did not fit in. I always had children pointing at me. And
you were tall.
I was scaring people all the time. I remember one time I was running, and a boy came around a corner on his bike and fell right off his bike. He saw me, and he had hit me, and I felt really bad. I was like, I'm sorry, and then I spoke to him in Japanese, and he was even more astounded. Now he couldn't speak, so I just kept running. I just felt I had done so much damage. But I think I had a lot of friends at school, but the relationships, those friendships, they're just so much different than the friendships I have at home. They're not as deep, because, I don't know, the maturity levels of kids in the States and in Japan are very different. Because the Japanese are so sheltered, and they're brought up just with a wall. They're very sheltered, and so in that respect, it was hard for me to relate to them. I mean, because they were drawing cartoons. It was a lot like being back in grade school, and at first I fought that. I think when I got there, I said, how am I going to live this way for a year with these friends? Just playing dolls. And then I took a second look and said, well, I will never have an opportunity to be this young again. So I just kind of rode with it, and yeah, I made some really good friends.
But they might have had these, what we would say primary play periods, but were they also very studious, and were
definitely.
They conscientious? So this was like a relief for them?
I think the reason they were so, I don't like to use the word immature because that sounds, but the reason that they were so young was because they were very studious. They were brought up to study, to study, to study, and they don't learn how to do anything else. School is their life, and they don't learn how to really communicate with people and things in that aspect. They don't learn that like we do. I mean, I think we're more brought up to be more well-rounded. I know my parents have always stressed, school, but then there's other things outside of school that you have to work on.
Well, that's an interesting viewpoint.
Yeah, it was really interesting because at first I didn't understand it.
Right.
It took time to understand what was really going on.
Tom Dersing, I'm just sitting here, and I'm sure your also hearing new things from Julie.
Right.
How does Rotary keep tabs on them? I mean, here you are in Grosse Pointe, and you've sponsored a student. Do other Rotarians in, let's say, Japan or wherever these young people go, do they then in turn feel a responsibility to kind of look out for them or give them support?
Well, they do. There is a definite responsibility. That's the one they turn to, is the committee or the chairman, as myself, because we provide, and as Julie received, a monthly allowance. In this case, the children that are here, the kids that are here, students, will receive $50 a month from Grosse Pointe Rotary just for spending money. And we encourage them to attend our meetings, which are every Monday noon. And I know that Julie attended probably many meetings there. And so you have an opportunity to ask them how things are going in their families, and you know, so there is a very close relationship, which there should be, because it is a Rotary program. And it has become one of the largest in a little over 20 years, with over 9,000 Rotary Exchange students traveling in many directions.
Well, you know, that I thought that was, I didn't realize this beforehand, but I'm certainly glad to know that the organization feels a responsibility or a commitment to these young people. What was the Rotary meeting like in Japan, Julie? Did you understand what was going on, or?
Yeah, I did, for the most part. A lot of it was life is one big vocabulary lesson over there. So a lot of it, the meetings were new vocabulary for me, so I was always, you know, during the speeches I had my dictionary going the whole time. But I liked it a lot. I liked going because I was obviously the only woman there, the only girl there, and there was a certain challenge to that with Japanese men because of the relations between men and women over there are very different than in America. And I always had a good time with that. And the Rotarians were very kind. They were really nice people, and they were always, you know, concerned about your welfare and concerned about how you were doing. And, you know, they never hesitated to sit down and just talk with you. And so it was really nice.
Oh, what kind of guidelines does the Rotary International give to these students, and what does Rotary want in return from the students, Tom Dersing?
Well, the guidelines are probably to prepare yourself as well as you can with a knowledge of your own country and of its culture and of its politics.
That's a wonderful point.
Of their politics and their history and those kind of things. And then the guidelines would include such things as not driving a car and not getting romantically involved and all the things that we would expect guidelines for a program of 18-year-olds to include. So that's it. And then when they come back, they're expected to give a program at Rotary. They're expected to make themselves available to other Rotary clubs within our district and clubs such as women's clubs and so forth. And this is happening in the other country, too, that she, as she is able to handle the language, is probably giving programs about our country. So it's a kind of a two-way street.
Julie, I think that's wonderful. You know, when Tom Dersing just mentioned to prepare yourself, I thought he was going to say learn about Japanese customs, but that's really remarkable to know enough about your country and to be able to just, when somebody asks something, well, why do you do this, or what historically, that you are able to do that. Were you ever asked to give an impromptu?
Yeah, a lot of times, but I would say more culturally, they would ask, for instance, how they eat rice with every meal. They'd say, well, don't you eat bread with every meal? Or questions along that, more lifestyles, and it was hard because they would ask you typical lifestyles, which they could go by because they're pretty uniform and unified as one, while we're all so diverse and so different. So it was really always hard for me to answer questions. I say, well, in the South they do it this way, but in the North they do it this way, and it was hard, but it was fun.
Have you given these talks for, let's say, the Grosse Pointe Rotary International?
Yeah, I went.
Very fine talk, I might say.
Thanks.
You get your approval. Now, have other Rotary groups called you to perhaps share your experiences?
Yes, I think I forget the name of, one did call me, but I was at school, so I wasn't able to go and speak to them.
You know, what did you tell the Rotary International of Grosse Pointe, what this experience meant to you? How would you put that into words?
First of all, I commended them for being involved in giving kids the experience that they gave me, and I really told them how much I learned. Not only I learned so much about my country and about Japan, but a lot about myself, and I think that was the most important part of my experience, was how much I think I grew more in that 12 months than I grew over 4 years of high school, by far.
You know, as parents, both Tom Dersing and myself are parents. Let's expand on that, Julie. What do you mean you learned to rely more on your inner resources, or?
It was more a process of getting to know who I was, because I don't think we realize how in our society we are brought up identifying ourselves with other people. Like, my name is Julie Forster. Well, no one cared that my name was Forster over there. That didn't matter. I was Julie San, and it was not Forster. And I also, you know, identified myself with my friends. I was in a certain group of friends, and you just, but over there, you didn't really have that. You weren't, no one cared your name was Julie Forster. You were, I mean, I was just by myself, growing up with I had no way to compare myself to the things I was doing. I couldn't say, well, Joe over there does it this way, but I'm doing it. It was just me, and so therefore, the only way I could compare myself was to myself. So I was really...
That's a wonderful... Many people go through their whole life not even beginning to recognize how important it is to know yourself.
It was, I think, by far the best part of my trip.
That's right. I think that's... I think in any country it would be very difficult, because people are different the world over, but I think where you're placed into a different culture and a language such as Japanese, I think that would be mind-boggling. You know, Tom, Julie just mentioned the things that she learned about herself. How does Rotary and its membership benefit? Is there a tangible benefit that Rotarians get when these young people come to the meeting and tell what they have learned?
I think so, and I think that we get it by having those that are here from other countries, which in this particular year we have 3 attending south that are from, 2 from Spain and 1 from Germany that are Rotary, and we sit with them every week or nearly every week and exchange ideas and hear about them, and I try to encourage more and more members to invite them into their homes and take them on weekend trips and to take advantage of what we have here. So I think and Julie and the others also have an opportunity to come to our meetings before they leave and know about Rotary. But I think we all learn from each other.
That's very nice. Julie, was there a certain highlight or a high point in your stay in Japan?
I think my highlight had a lot to do with the language being overcome, because after a period of time you're no longer translating it in your mind. You're just speaking it as you would English without really thinking, and that was the highlight, because it just led to so many other, you know, connections with families and with relationships with people. It was a lot easier to make friends once you've done that. So that was, and it was about I'd say after about 4 months, it just started to click and click. I mean, you're constantly learning, but the first time you speak a word or answer a question without having to think about it first is just incredible. It's just the neatest feeling. Or dreaming a dream in Japanese. I remember dreaming in my family in America, they were all speaking Japanese, and I was saying, well, this is great. You're speaking too. And it was just, it was really neat.
Julie, were you taking language classes over there? I mean, did they have a special program for you?
Not really in my school. I had tutors come in, but it was kind of, they'd sit down and they'd say, okay, what do you want to learn? And you'd say, Japanese. So it was more, I think just life was really my lesson. It was, I studied, I mean, I got more out of it when I studied by myself. I had books and I studied in the library a couple hours a day, and then I'd go home and I'd try to use what I studied. you know, a certain phrase. And I mean, I think living with the families was really the education.
Did you have the earphones, I mean the recordings of Japanese?
Mm-hmm. I did.
That's wonderful.
But I use those more now than I did then, just to keep myself in touch with the Japanese, because it was all around you anyway, and there are certain dialects. And the recordings I had were more of the Tokyo dialect, which was more formal, whereas where I was living, it was, you know, the further, I think, south you get, it's less formal, the talk, this way of speech. So you just learn from your families. The families were just they were just incredible. They were the solid part of your stay. I mean, they were who you could count on, and they were always there for you. And I mean, the relationships I established with those people are just incredible. I mean, I feel almost the same way for those people as I do for my parents in America.
Oh, that speaks well of you, Julie. You know, I think that when you give of yourself, then you have an opportunity to really gain something. From a youthful standpoint, what do you feel the Japanese can learn from us, and what could we learn from the Japanese?
I think what we could learn from them is their dedication and their family bonding. I really liked that. How the elderly live with the family. There's just generations and generations living together, you know, in the same house. I really liked that because you learned so much. And what they could learn from us, I think maybe our freeness. We have a lot more freeness in expressing ourselves. They often repress a lot of their feelings. And I loved it when one time when I left Japan, one of my fathers started to cry, which was just, not, I mean, I was dumbfounded because, first of all, he was a man, and he was crying over a girl who was leaving, and that was just almost unheard of. And I think they could learn a little more of that from us, is our freeness and our ways we like to express ourselves.
Gosh, Tom Dersing, I think you can take back a feeling of tremendous pride to the Rotarians for this kind of an experience that the Rotarians worldwide give to these students.
Yeah, well, they're outstanding students when they go, and they are scholastically in the upper third of their class, and they have to have good reasons for going and not escaping a situation here, but really wanting to learn more about themselves and the world.
Well, I'm just so pleased that Julie Forster and Tom Dersing could join us today, because I think this has been an area that I had absolutely just peripheral knowledge, but nothing to what Julie has shared with us of her time in Japan, and certainly what Tom Dersing, who has guided this foreign exchange program for the past 9 years, although he is not involved directly right now, have brought to us. I hope that through this we will become more aware of the Rotary International and perhaps become more supportive in their fundraising efforts to provide this opportunity for our young people. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom Dersing.
Thanks for the opportunity of being here.
Before I came to the studio, I did pull out the dictionary and look up the meaning of fan. And the informal meaning is an avid admirer or an enthusiastic admirer. And I have to admit that indeed I am with our guest today. I've been a fan of his for a number of years, enjoying the columns he's written for the newspapers, listening to his views as he espoused them on radio. But most of all, what I really admired about our guest is his sense of intellectual awareness of the subject, but it was also filled with a lot of common sense and a dash of humor. I'm delighted to present David Littman, Senior Vice President, and no, it isn't Senior Vice President, it's Vice President and Senior Economist of Manufacturers Bank.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with Grosse Pointe Cable.
Wonderful. You know, David Littman, I think I'm at in a quandary because here I was brought up in the philosophy that a penny saved is a penny earned, and you should always live just below your income and save, save, save. And now suddenly that has been kind of forgotten with, and I use our deficits as an example.
Oh, it's very true, and I think what's true for the individual and his own financial integrity is true for the state government, true for the federal government. If there's to be a tomorrow, one that is of one's own making, not dependent on a lot of others, then one should think about saving, providing resources for the next day. And I think that's one of the virtues that's made the country a premier economy on earth and hope for the free world, providing choices for our citizens and for much of the rest of the world. The secret is now, always has been and always will be, a country that saves more and therefore invests more will have higher productivity and higher living standards tomorrow.
Oh, goodness. Then it sounds to me as though we're delaying the inevitable. Or I guess there's another school of thought that if we did indeed save more, then our production would go down because people wouldn't be spending enough money to fuel the economy.
Well, indeed, no. There are always people who are providing for shelter and food, transportation. So there's plenty of spending. But as we move up through the life cycle, there's also the fact that we've accommodated most of those kinds of spendings, and we're able to save more if inflation isn't roaring, if taxes aren't too high. It's possible, and there's every incentive in the world to save. The problem with a country when it discourages saving, promotes spending at the expense of saving, is that the government that is taxing and spending is removing some of the savings from the economy and therefore crowding out investment that will sponsor a better future.
You know, I think the other opinion that I've heard is that if Congress should raise taxes to apply it against the deficit, that in actuality that money will not be put totally to the deficit, but it will just be used to increase other spending programs. So isn't that like the dog chasing his tail?
Well, in fact, you're perfectly right. Empirical evidence shows, and this is a large sweep of our history, from 1947 through 1986, for each dollar that the federal government raised in taxes, new taxes, they spent $1.58. So the incentives are all turned upside down. You give the politicians more money, and not the guess, not the theory, but the fact is they'll spend that and a whole lot more because that's how they get elected and reelected. And it's only a wary public, one that is vigilant at all times, that says, no, I can spend the money more effectively without supporting a big bureaucracy if they'll leave it in my pocket in the first place. And until the voting habits of the public come to that conclusion, reflect that in the makeup of Congress, I'm afraid what happens is, as savings are reduced because taxes and inflation kill off those motivations, it's not as if the economy collapses suddenly like the one-horse shay. But instead, what happens is the growth potential of the U.S. economy becomes less and less competitive. Instead of 4%, 5% annual average real growth, that is without inflation, our growth rates slow to 3%, 2%, and so forth, as government, a big spender, and saving nothing becomes a larger and larger share of the economy. You know, Ben Franklin once said that any government that taxes more than 10% of its population's income must be regarded as a most cruel and harsh type of government. Indeed, today, we work to pay off all of our taxes. The average person works till about May 6th before he's free and can start working for himself. So instead of representing 10%, taxes, all of taxes, represent today a burden of some 37%.
You know, David Littman, as I'm listening to you and your quote from Ben Franklin, I think what concerns me most is that our government feels that they know how to spend our money better because we would not, as individuals or collectively, spend it on the social program or the social agenda that Congress sees as being the best for all citizens. Now, how do we kind of equate Ben Franklin's little saying with the reality of today?
It wasn't just Ben Franklin, it was Thomas Jefferson, too.
Every one of them.
who felt that it was a great arrogance on the part of government, just raw power that would presume they were better as intellectuals to figure out what we indeed as citizens know for ourselves. Again, history speaks very loudly and clearly to the fact that this has been the most generous nation on earth. We have taken care of poor. If you don't take money away from the private organizations, they have indeed done a very rich job of taking care of the most in need of institutionalized care. Indeed, one can look at a perfect ward of the state, and that's the American Indian. Now, there's a case where the government, for most of this century, has had a welfare group unto itself, a group that it is in charge of. The Indian has today among the lowest life expectancies, the worst medical care, the most dire poverty. Now, if that is an example of how government, federal government in this case, can do a better job than the church groups, than the eleemosynary institutions, than the individuals, I think we'd better look for a new and better effective system. Indeed, most of the government spending, I'm afraid, gets channeled and leaked through to a bureaucracy, whereas if you put direct spending to every one of the people in most need, able-bodied or unable, disabled, it's been figured you could bring them all over the poverty level many times over.
I never thought of that American Indian analogy, but that certainly is true. The other thought that comes to mind right now is we have enjoyed 6 years of tremendous expansion under the Reagan administration, and yet at the same time we've had a conflict of interest, if you want to say. We've had this tremendous expansion and these tremendous deficits, federal deficit as well as trade deficit. Are we stealing from the next generation's future? I mean, is this whole thing just going to collapse at some given point?
No, I don't think so. The trade deficit and the budget deficit are a bit different and should be separated when we're talking about them. First, it is true. The past 6 years have been, 6 and a third year now, have been unprecedented. There's been no comparable period of sustained growth during peacetime in our nation's history. You'd have to go back to the beginning of American economic statistics, 1854, and to find that were true. And yet, yes, we have a staggering budget deficit, even though it's come down as a percent of our gross national product, meaning our ability to service it, that the budget deficit more appropriately represents almost 55%, sometimes 60% of our nation's savings, domestically generated savings. And that's what has to finance these deficits. Mm-hmm. And of course, the interest on those deficits continues to mount from 3-4% of the budget spending to over 15% now. In that sense, it does represent the improprieties of Congress and the administrations in the past, spending much more than they took in through revenues. The fact is, those deficits can be brought down instantly according to Congress and sometimes the administration, if you raise taxes. But all that does is weaken the ability to pay future taxes, so it's a near-term fix that does nothing for the long term. Instead, just merely aggravates and makes the deficits larger in the future. So the answer to our yawning deficits at $150 to $200 billion is better control, just as an individual and his personal finances, slower growth in spending.
Mm-hmm.
That's the key.
You know, that kind of, we as individuals have taken the Madison Avenue approach of you deserve, charge it. I mean, the airlines have it, the stores have it, that we all we can spend our money by using plastic, and eventually we can pay it off at our leisure. So in essence, that's what the government has also done. They've just spent before they had it.
Well, there's a difference. It's worse in the case of federal government because they don't save anything. Instead, annually, they're dis-saving. They're the largest dis-savers on the face of the earth that the world has ever known. The federal government, when it's running $150, $180 billion deficits, isn't saving anything. But the individual, he's working, he's productive, and he's not only saving somewhere between, it's estimated, 4 to 8% of his income each year, but he's also generating goods and services that are a contribution to the market basket, actually increasing the overall wealth of the nation. The government, by contrast, is just in the business of redistributing. And that is not considered, even by government accountants, as a productive endeavor. Mm-hmm. Not that you don't need some government. Of course, you need it for defense, a system of justice and law and order, things that can't not be as effectively generated or provided by the private sector. But I think the key here is that where government is most effective, it's being strained to get the resources, defense, mm-hmm. and where it's least effective, as we've mentioned many of the social spending activities, that's where it's gone crazy and now spends double what it does in some of the most effective areas, such as defense, infrastructure, roads, mm-hmm. bridges, and so forth.
Boy, but I do think Congress is on the right track with their spending patterns if they want to get elected. Isn't that right?
Oh, absolutely. Up to the point where people are disgusted by corruption and self-serving conflicts of interest. I'm certain that no politician ever won an election by saying, I'll do less for you. And that's too bad. It's a democracy, and we have to go back to the people, their education levels, and their time frame to see that it's not just today that matters, but the future generations, mm-hmm. as you mentioned earlier in your question.
When I think of how much foreign investment is in the United States now, the question has been raised, what if all of the foreign investment suddenly would take their money out of the United States? What would happen?
Well, interest rates, of course, would rise very quickly, probably restoring some of that investment. You'd have to say, why would they suddenly take their investment out of the United States? There would have to be some confidence crisis. And the only two reasons I would think would be, again, the government showed it absolutely was not ever going to get its spending down, therefore the deficits down, or started running a tremendous inflation, debasing the currency as we did in the late 1970s. Now, if we keep a relatively stable money situation, so the price levels don't get away from us, don't invoke all sorts of shoot thyself in the foot trade protectionism, I think we can avoid a confidence crisis. We're still perhaps seen as the largest capital markets and the most politically stable nation on earth. Therefore, capital does come this way to help support our deficits. By the way, I think there's been a misconception here. The U.S. direct investment overseas as of 1987 was it was over $300 billion. foreign investment in this country in 1987 was about $262 billion. We still have a considerable investment overseas, more than foreigners have here. But even then, the fact that we do run trade deficits in any one year or a string of years, that's always been a sign of our growing faster. And the fact that investment dollars come back here is a symbol of the strength others feel the U.S. economy represents. And that's why. It's one reason. The foreign investment here, Japanese locating plants, it's one reason why our employment over the Reagan years has grown some 19 million persons. There's no other nation in the history of the world on earth today that has ever come close to matching that employment growth, either in numbers or percent.
Well, but then just to play the devil's advocate, when you said that 19 million jobs, but are they, as Congress asked, quality jobs, or are these jobs that are demeaning to an individual?
Most of the jobs, contrary to the popular myth, have been good, above average income jobs. And so they represent more than just the service sector. They're production jobs. The whole balance of industry has seen increased employment. So there's nothing demeaning about the jobs. The only thing demeaning would be the current proposals by the administration and the Congress to increase the minimum wage, because that would do a lot of the most unfortunate, most disadvantaged people, minorities, disabled or partially disabled, that would do them out of a job, because their productivity while they're entering the labor force is often the lowest. And if Congress makes it unprofitable for business to buy this labor by raising the mandated wage and other requirements of employment, they simply will not be affordable, and they will find themselves on the unemployment line. Now, that'll give Congress a great reason perhaps to expand its social programs, but for the wrong reasons. I don't think there's a lot of integrity in that kind of legislation.
Well, that's a different view. What about the Graham-Rudman? Wasn't that supposed to put a curb on spending and bring our government spending programs under control and whittle down the deficit?
Yes, the Graham-Rudman legislation had the idea of targeting how much deficit in any one year you could generate in the federal government. Each year it targeted a lower deficit, which means that a lower amount by which the government could outspend the revenues that were being produced by a growing economy. Now, actually, that worked pretty well in fiscal year 1986 and 87, because for the first time in so many years, the government was limited to spending increases of only 3.5%. And because the economy was growing nicely, income tax rates were reduced for persons, so there was incentive to expand production and productive labor. And because of the growth, the economy was growing at 4, 5, and 6%. It was generating revenues of $70 and $80 billion. So the deficits were coming down by the difference, which was about $40 billion.
And this is, well, let's hope they continue to move along. But as I look at the agenda for Congress, it is, when I heard you lecture once, you said 3 things can cause problems: the increase in the minimum wage, an increase in taxes, and a large agenda of social programs that have no funding. All those things are in place.
Yes, well, it's never very clear-cut. As much as an economist would like to give healthy economic prescriptions for policy, it so often happens that the politics overwhelm the economic good judgment and become detrimental. There's one other aspect, as you know, and I think this is the reference you're making. The Congress would like to mandate child care, universal health care. Each one of these programs has tremendous costs. Now, Congress says, well, we've got a Graham-Rudman budget limitation to pay attention to, so what we'll do is we'll just impose this as a law that all companies have to supply that to their employees, current and prospective employees. And all that does is drive up the cost of employment. It's like an employment tax. Government then is not taxing us directly, but through a payroll tax. What does American business say? Hey, we have to be competitive or else we're not going to be around. We can cut down on other benefits that we currently offer the employee, or we can lay them off or not hire as many in the future. In each case, Congress, by imposing these new programs, is slowing the engine of growth that has done so much for us over the years.
It's discouraging. And it's discouraging to think that the United States has been called a debtor nation, just as the title is referred to Brazil or Mexico. I mean, have we been reduced to being a debtor nation?
Oh, not at all. Brazil and Mexico, they haven't had the real growth rates, 4% over the past 6 years, year after year. Their inflation rates are in the hundreds to 1,000% range. Ours have been 3.3% over the past 6 years. Fundamentally, our economy is still a relatively strong economy. So we generate income, and we're not a debtor nation, because if you took the direct investment of $300 billion plus that we have overseas, and you actually valued that not at the original investment value, but at today's market value, you would see we're anything but a debtor nation. But unfortunately, there's been a lot of misinformation, and they don't understand. People don't understand that were we to value our current investments at market prices, the supposed debtor nation syndrome or thinking would go away. Other nations do value their investments here at current market values.
This disinformation, I'm beginning to feel like I'm a pawn in this never-ending battle of being brainwashed, so that I immediately begin to think raising taxes is the only way to go for our good. And I guess that's what Congress or government or social agencies want you to think, because this certainly then advances their program.
That's exactly right. And that is the way I think we have to critically look at each new proposal. For whom is it really intended? How does it make government compete for resources versus our competition for resources as individuals or businesses? There's often a very hidden agenda. But if we, I think, look a little more critically at the issues, at what's being taken out of our pockets and where it's being spent and by whom, we get a better idea of what to do with our votes. Now, the Grace Commission was a proposal that would have saved government if they just increase their efficiencies and stick to what they should be doing instead of what they should not be doing. It would save half $1 trillion over a 5-year period. Now, not even half of the Grace Commission's proposals have been implemented. Congress is, the Pentagon has identified the bases that are non-essential, which, if closed, would save $5.6 billion annually. Has the Congress done anything about that? When the Defense Department, which so many of them rail against continually, here's a chance to put your deeds where your mouth is, but they haven't stepped up to it, not yet.
But we all know why.
Well, they've got their little constituencies, or they've got their little agendas which take them to the next election. Two principles, and you see it again and again. The congressmen, not all, some are very good, have a lot of integrity. Many of them say, however, does this get me elected? Does it get me reelected? And that is the short-sighted, myopic philosophy that, if we adopted as individuals, would probably put us in a debtor's prison.
Wow. You know, the other factor that has caused a lot of problems is the Federal Reserve's tinkering with the money supply. Has that been put to rest? I mean, have we got a tinkerer who isn't interested in throwing a monkey wrench into everything?
Well, the current chairman of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, has only been at the helm a couple years. And I'd have to say he's done a commendable job, because his effort has been, I think, to keep the growth of money more stable and at lower growth rates than in the years preceding him. As a matter of fact, probably in the past 6 years, the Federal Reserve has done better than in the prior 70 years. I say that because the two objectives of monetary policy in the United States should be, one, to keep money growth at a steady rate, predictable rate, so people aren't always having to say, well, what shall I do with my financial or real investments, because it might be high inflation or it might be depression the next year. And secondly, to keep those growth rates of money at low rates so as not to sponsor high inflation. And the proposal, which I think is correct, it was proposed long before Milton Friedman, who received the Nobel Prize, would say keep money growth geared to what the real output of the U.S. economy is. And year after year, that's something on the order of 3%. Money growth in the past year has been about 6%. So we have at least 3% inflation.
What do you see for us in the rest of '89 and the beginning of '90, David Littman?
Well, I think the rest of this year, 1989, will be recession-free. I think inflation rates will move up from 3.4% last year to probably 5% this year. I think real growth rates will come down from about 3.8% last year to 2.7% this year. I think the Federal Reserve is absolutely correct in trying to limit the growth rate of money right now so as to reduce the inflation rates and the interest rates. So I think we're setting, if it all comes off correctly, we're setting the stage now for a more stable, slower growing economy in 1990. I think we can avoid recession, but I think it's going to be very slow.
You know, David Littman, here we are at the end of a half hour that went by all too quickly. I think if you can have the time to come back in September, when George Bush's administration has had more time, and when we find out if minimum wage is going up, if taxes are going up, and if these social programs agenda are in place, we will have to talk to you about what the future holds for us then.
Oh, I enjoyed that very much. Thank you.
Thank you, David Littman, for joining us, and tune in next September for a final recap on what's happening to our economy. Was a song on Broadway that said, we're at an opening, the show is about to begin. And that's the way I feel today with Grosse Pointe Cable. We are at an opening at Walton Pierce, introducing a new line of clothes. There's a sense of excitement in the air as the customers are gathering together for a seminar, as well as a few refreshments. Of course, there are carrot sticks and all the good things that we should be eating. And it all is to introduce Susan Linsk and her designer development concept, the Elliott Andrews Collection. With us today are one of the owners of Walton Pierce, Mary Jo Huntington, and the designer herself, Susan Linsk. We're delighted that you could be with us, Susan, as well as you, Mary Jo Huntington, to allow us to be here. I have to start, Mary Jo, by asking you, what is the common bond between you, Walton Pierce, and Susan Linsk? What did you find that kind of carried along the tradition?
Well, Walton Pierce began with Mrs. Pierce with a custom clothing trade. She knew her customers, she understood her customers, And she knew that they wanted quality and detail and excellent fabrics. When I met Susan Linsk, I could see that she had the same philosophy, and it was an instant chemistry.
Well, that certainly speaks well of your astuteness in recognizing that, because I think one of the earliest recollections that I have with Walton Pierce is through the newspaper, that whenever Mrs. Pierce came back from Europe, not only would this be almost front page reporting, but they would also have an extensive spread on the fashion page on the fabric she had brought back, and the adjectives that were used to describe it would be absolutely mind-boggling. I think that leads me to ask Susan Linsk, what made you decide that today's woman in our, I think I would call our society very automated and an instant gratification society, that what made you think that someone would want to have fabrics that were absolutely stunning, or attention to detail, or these niceties that we have forgotten?
Well, I don't think we've forgotten them. I think it's really has to do with budget and planning and really wanting everything you possibly can afford. And my idea was that to select things and to make things that women would enjoy wearing and to form an image of being very impressionable. The cost of fabrics are very expensive today, and we search the world for them, and I think making things that are beautiful and that women are what they wear.
Well, I think that's a very wonderful philosophy, and I thought it was interesting when you said it's budget, and you're dealing right there in terms of reality, because the fabrics that we had read about are so, well, out of line right now, that it's nice to know that you have that feeling of dealing with the working woman, the career woman, or the woman who is active in the community. Let me ask you, how did you reach your fashion maturity? What did you do?
I've never reached my fashion maturity.
How did you get to where you're at right now?
Well, we were talking about that early today. I think it all started when I was probably 6 years old and loved dolls and played with Ginny dolls when I grew up in Virginia, and always had a idea of what I wanted to do when I grew up, and that was to be someone famous in the fashion industry and to work in the glamorous field of fashion. And what I did is I worked on teen boards and college boards, and then studied marketing in college, and then worked for a very large store in Atlanta and went through an executive training program. And really, my whole focus has been retail and being a buyer and a merchandise manager. And I moved to San Francisco, and I worked for a company for 8 years, and really there were 40 stores, and did all the designing and all the selecting of fabrics, because we wanted to have a point of view and exclusivity. At that time, the working woman in John Malloy's book was coming into focus, and dressing for success was important. And so I was really doing this 10 years ago, and the way I formed my own company was everything I always did for everybody else, and that's what I do now.
You mean at the store in San Francisco, you were already designing the clothes that they were going to show?
Well, the reason we did is because of the competitive edge of larger department stores, and my background has always been working for better specialty stores, and we decided that we did not want to have the same brands that all the other stores did. So what we did, we went to New York, bought all our fabrics, and then we designed the jackets and the pants and the skirts and the blouses and the accessories, and everything all went together in a shop-like concept. And from that idea, we had a wonderful business. And then in 1980, I was asked to go to work for Bass Shoe Company as their accessories director. So that was the first time I deviated from retail to manufacturing. And I was asked to design.
To shoes.
No, to handbags for women and children. And that was my first involvement in manufacturing, where we had to buy all the thread and all the snaps and everything to make handbags. And I learned that manufacturing is much more complex than retail, because you have to pay attention to all the detail in creating a garment. It's almost like baking a cake.
That's amazing. Then what decided you to start your own business?
After I had a baby, I said I wasn't going to work so hard. And so this was 4 years ago, and I was going to start my business and have 12 clients, and I decided that would be the way to have a very nice small business. But the idea grew, and people liked my concept and liked my philosophy, and liked the store training that I got involved with and the customer involvement, and it just grew and flourished, and now I have 7 employees, and it's something very fresh and new that no one else has done, and tied in retail with manufacturing to make a wardrobing concept.
I think one of the things that I have noticed in watching your seminar and seeing the clothes that were presented is that you deal with the woman as she is. Who actually are you designing for then? Is it just the career woman?
No, she's... Statistics are that 88% of the women in America do work, whether it is in their home or part-time, but they are doing something. So the idea is for the multifaceted customer that she is a juggler like myself. She works, she's married to an executive, she travels, she has family, she's active in the community, she's active in her parish or whatever she may do. And so I think time is a very important element, and so that's why we choose to work with colors and fabrics and trends so she can easily put herself together in a very busy environment today.
So in essence, what you're really doing is designing for yourself.
Yes.
Because you're that woman.
Yes.
And so is Mary Jo Huntington. What kind of an impact do you think Susan Linsk will have on you, Mary Jo, personally, as well as the customers that you serve at Walton Pierce?
Well, as Susan said, she believes she is that woman, and I believe I know what the Walton Pierce woman wants, and believe that I am that woman. We are not
Do you
really...
mind me telling you, Mary Jo, I do believe you are.
We are not swayed by what 7th Avenue says we should wear. Certainly, in the last year, they had skirts to the knee or above. Well, we saw ourselves in those 20 years ago, and we hope we will never see ourselves in those skirts again.
Unless you're in high school.
Unless you're in high school. But then again, too, I may have an older woman who is in the store, and maybe her best attribute is her legs. And if you have nice legs, why not show them?
Well, that's true. So, really, it's versatility then, isn't it? It isn't just bringing all short skirts in, and the customer is torn between being fashionable, but there is a choice, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
There is definitely a choice. There is a choice in Susan's collection. You can have a career look, or you can have a look of wife and mother. You choose, and it's there. You can alter the look. You can have a 27-inch skirt, which Susan brings in, which will fit the 5'7" model that you saw the clothing on. Or if you want to alter it a bit for yourself and make it at the bottom of your knee, we can easily do that also.
Oh, well, that's nice. That shows a matter of choice and personal feeling towards clothes. When I said that, you certainly are Mary Jo Huntington. I think what you have on today is certainly wonderful. And when you said you can alter, I think you'd have to take pinches here and there on my body in order to have me look that good. Susan Linsk, in the Connecticut Spotlight, which I have here, you were quoted as saying, selections that are durable, the way Europeans are used to it, like the pieces of the wardrobe can be multiplied and used for many years to come. Do you think that's going to work here?
Well, the European philosophy is to buy fewer and to buy better. And a European woman will buy one wonderful outfit and wear it every other day or wear it every day. And I believe that quality is better than quantity in purchasing clothes today, and these are clothes that should work back and forth to things that you've had in your wardrobe 2 or 3 years ago, and also work forward to what your plan is. I've asked the question if women buy by budget or if they buy by impulse, and I've traveled by all over the country, and women have told me by buy by impulse, and what that means is they buy by sleeves, they buy by color, they buy excitement, they buy by fabric, and most of all, everything has to fit. And that's the way I think a European woman thinks. And yes, I do think it will come, because it's working for me, and that's what I believe.
Well, I guess what I'm concerned about, and I think after spending many years raising a family and putting that in its focus and its priority, all I read in the fashion page were the latest trends, the latest fads, and most of those did not look good on me, personally. So I think what you're saying is so interesting, because I wonder if 7th Avenue has gotten the message, or if that's just in the couturier collections.
Well, I think 7th Avenue hasn't listened. They've listened to 7th Avenue, and they haven't listened to consumers. Some of the problems with 7th Avenue, they don't go beyond New York City. And I travel the entire United States, and I go to shopping centers, I see baby carriages, I see women in the morning and at noon and in the evenings, and it's not the real world. It's beyond that, and women do a lot of things, and they want clothes that will work for them, and they want clothes that will last and will hold up and work through the dry cleaners. And the dry cleaners ruin everything, and as we all well know. And so we have to be able to go beyond that today.
You know, Mary Jo, Susan just mentioned something about the timelessness of classics. Those weren't quite her words, but that certainly gives you another identity with her and Walton Pierce, wouldn't you say?
Most certainly I would. When I first met Susan, there was an instant chemistry between the two of them, between the two of us. I knew that the clothing that she was showing us was a conservative dress jacket. It had style, it had color, it had what our women were looking for.
But it wasn't dowdy.
It was not at all dowdy.
No.
It was not fashion forward, but it was perfect for the occasion.
That's right. I think we all want to look smart, or I at times hope to always look smart, but I think sometimes you become concerned if you're not trendy, then the concern is that perhaps you're going to look dowdy. But what I've seen today, I think your concept of it certainly works well. What kind of an impact do you think that this is going to have on your customers?
Elliot Andrews will be an exclusive with Walton Pierce.
You know, explain that, Mary Jo.
Well, Susan deals with 28 specialty stores throughout the United States. We are the only distributors of her clothing. So if you
in this
come
entire area?
in the United States, we have the Elliot Andrews collection, as does another store in Grand Rapids. So if you come in and you buy the beautiful azalea jacket, you won't be seen about town.
That'll be a real plus, because sometimes when I see the racks upon racks of clothing, and they're all the same thing, and maybe 10 in every size, and not only one store, but in many, many stores, you know, there is always the chance that you see yourself coming and going. In the Women's Wear Daily, Susan Linsk, they had an interesting article about your company. What I thought made it very relevant was the fact that you are designing for today's woman, but you also believe that today's woman can certainly run a business. How have you incorporated that in your own business structure?
Well, I think it's harder to run a home than a business. I have a 4-year-old, and we have a nanny at home, and she always tells me that she wants to trade places with me, and I think it's harder to run a home than run a business. But if you're delegating the responsibility of your home with a plumber or with the air conditioning man or whoever, you really delegate things to be done, and that's almost the same way as running a business.
But what I certainly agree with that, because raising a large family, I think when you hear the promos of what a wife should be paid, I mean, she should be paid a plumber's fee, an electrician's fee, and everything else. But I also think what I liked about the NW magazine was the fact that you have placed women in executive positions. And that's what I thought was rather startling and rather wonderful to think that you as a woman would have that confidence in your sisters.
Well, that's not really by choice. It's our attorney happens to be a woman, and she's just looks the part, and she is.
Don't say it. Don't say it, because you're going to say she's tall, she's a size 8, she's fashion development concept.
She is. She is. The other choice I have made in staff are retailing-oriented people that have worked with customers and stores. They don't have the mentality of New York City and what is in and what is out, because it really doesn't make any difference at all. It's what is right.
Well, when you said you didn't have much of a choice, but still, I think most of your executives are women, and your husband is what I would say the minority. Is that correct?
That's true. Well, he was the senior vice president with Revlon, and he thought it was a good idea to work together. And Mary Jo and I have talked about this because we're in a parallel situation with working with our husbands, and it's a wonderful extension of our lives working with my husband. He handles the marketing and the financial part, and I handle the creative part and the retail part, and we all work well together. We work as a team.
How do you fit in your son? You know, I think that is the most difficult aspect of being a career woman, that how do you spend, when we talk about quality time, it isn't just how you spend the time, but it's the amount of time as well.
Well, I think prime time parenting is very important today, and my time from leaving New York City and taking the train up to Connecticut is completely divorced from fashion. It's really reading, and it's private time, and when I do come home, I spend all my time with Reed, and on weekends we spend all our time with our son, and he understands that Mommy works.
That's great. You know, Susan touched on something, Mary Jo, that I had not really considered. Now that you and Bill have taken over Walton Pierce, how have you met that situation?
We enjoy it totally. We each have our own areas of concern. We each support each other. He knows that I'm going to do what is best for the company and the customer, and I know that he's going to do the same thing.
Now, I know this is very public, but do you ever disagree?
Most certainly we do disagree. I usually walk away, and then we pick up a little later on.
And resolve it somehow.
And we always resolve it.
Well, you certainly have resolved it for the best of Walton Pierce, because I think the changes that you have brought in, both of you have brought in, is, as one of your elderly clients just said this afternoon, that she really enjoys what you young people are doing, because she feels younger with the type of clothing that she is buying at Walton Pierce than she has ever done before. So that certainly speaks volumes.
Thank you.
Susan Linsk, we were talking about fabric and about attention to detail, which has been so prevalent in Walton Pierce's history. Could we see an example of one of your designs, and could you describe it for us?
Yes, I think the whole effort is in fabrications and in color. And what we have chosen to do is to go to Europe and select all the beautiful fabrics. And here we show a window pane jacket, all perfectly matched. And the whole idea is to have the crispness of the fabric, cardigan jacket, large 2-button closure with a new slim skirt and a back slit. The blouse is a white 18 mummy crepe de chine, piped in navy, and what we've chosen to do is a navy on the cuff so the working woman doesn't get her cuffs dirty.
That was really interesting. Thank you very much.
Okay, if you could stand right there for a second.
I noticed that Mary Jo Huntington was wearing a, if I can call it, a pantsuit. Is this going to be something that we can expect to continue in the fashion tradition?
Well, I think it's really a new option, and the word pantsuit has been around for a long time, and the whole idea is a new way of dressing. We all have worn skirt suits or suits, but what we've chosen to do this season is a new jacket with a rounded shoulder and a soft pant, a city pant that can be worn to business. We're finding that women in the creative world such as interior designers or in the fashion industry, have worn pants for a long time, but there are women in business that pants are acceptable. The whole idea is a one-piece dressing as a total look, and the fabric chosen here is a wool and viscose from France, and it is a solid, non-solid, that meaning that all the it's a plaid, and all the plaids match perfectly together, so it gives a great texture effect. And what we've done is a very beautiful white blouse to go with this for upper body focus for this season, with all hand stitching around the neck and around the cuffs.
What does the viscose do for the fabric?
Viscose adds resiliency, it's less wrinkle resistant, it adds bounce, it's longer wearing. It is a man-made fabric, but it's something that it's not really new. It's a new word of saying rayon.
Oh, thank you, Susan. I liked all of your fashions, Susan Linsk, but the one that I really enjoyed was what I term the classic look. The cardigan, the lovely blouse, especially the jewelry, and the pant look. Could you describe that to us, please?
Well, one thing that makes classics different from yesterday are the embellishments, and I think we can thank Christian LaCroix for all the embellishments and all the faux that he has brought to fashion. And one thing that we've added are beautiful gold buttons that do come from France, and to have them focus on the pants and the blouses and the sweaters. Also by adding Grosgrain Ribbon. Grosgrain Ribbon has been around for many, many years, but done in a crispy texture on the sweater jackets at the sleeve and also at the shoulder treatment. New focus here is the new wider pant. The pant width is 21 inches on the bottom, and you would think about old palazzo pants, but that's not true anymore. It is a stovepipe pant, and it's camouflages figure types, and it just looks wonderful on. The pants are all fully lined, and I feel that this pant will go forward into fall of 1989.
Could you also describe the jewelry? The belt is also...
The more the better. The whole jewelry idea is to take all your real pearls and your gold chains and mix them with the imitation things, and mauve pearl earrings, large focal point earrings, several strands of pearls, chain belts, ones that droop a little bit, lots of coins, all mixed together. Adding 5 or 6 things is okay.
Well, it certainly looks like a wonderful picture. I'm delighted that you brought in these 3 models for us to get a feeling of your collection.
Thank you.
Susan Linsk, I'm just dying to ask this question. If one is not tall and a size 8, is there hope for such an individual in Fashion Development Concepts, the Elliott Andrews collection?
Well, I'm the designer, and I'm a size 12, and I think I've learned how to camouflage a multitude of sin.
Yay! What are the boards that you have next to you?
Well, these are planning boards. This is the early beginning of how we plan our season. And really, we start with color. We're going to Paris next, a week from today, to work on spring 1990. Now, all of this work was done last year at this time, and we come up with different concepts for the season, and the first concept we came up with is called Absolute. And we learned about the #1 focal color was called Azalea, and we made a beautiful wool file jacket mixed with cool wool, which is a wonderful breathing fabric, lightweight window pane, and then mixed with solid navy pieces, a wonderful solid-on-solid dress with a lightweight viscose 2-piece soft dressing with a keyhole back, and then white shirting for all the tabletop dressing. And then to top it all off, the perfect essential raincoat is in a poplin in pale silvery gray from Italy.
That looks lovely. You know, Mary Jo, isn't that on the cover of the catalog?
Yes, Susan chose the Azalea jacket for the cover of her catalog, and we were happy to send this to 7,500 people in the community. We are thrilled about this because we can take Walton Pierce into the homes for those women who do not have the time to come to us.
Oh, that's marvelous. What is the next board?
The next board we're calling Promenade, and it was the whole idea of a way to use new icy pastels. The crispness of a little district check here in a fabric from France in a woolen viscose mixed with dyed to match beautiful silk jacquard blouses and a wonderful window pane pantsuit and the perfect jewelry dress of a cool wool white dress with a big cuff-link closure at the cuff.
Is that next board next year's fashion?
No, that's still this year's fashion, and this is called our decorative board. And what we did here is a lot of wonderful pattern mixing here with a beautiful viscose and a very neat floral, mixed with dots for a little bit of a whimsical look towards summer. And then a fabric we found in Italy with viscose and linen, guaranteed not to wrinkle, but to look like linen, in a wonderful chemise dress, which is the #1 dress that everyone should purchase this summer, and then beautiful handkerchief linen in a brand new summer pink color.
That's wonderful. And one more, the essential separates.
Well, I thought of this because I thought that there should be separates a woman could put together and look like suiting. So again, we used that wonderful viscose and linen into a brand new pant with 21-inch leg, and then all the chains and a cotton sweater, wonderful new skirt, and then done in a beautiful fawn color, black and navy, and of course summer white with a crested gold button that follows through for the entire theme.
This is really an exciting fashion concept. I want you to know that the secret is out. Susan told all of the people attending the seminar that if they are to buy anything for next season, they should buy red. And you can say that you heard it first on Grosse Pointe Cable. We're delighted that Mary Jo Huntington and Susan Linsk could join us today and give us the word on fashion.
Thanks.
Really the time of celebration. No, I'm not referring to the 4th of July or Labor Day coming up. I'm referring to the celebrations going on in France. With us, we have two guests who are going to explain to us not only the celebrations going on in France, but also the celebrations that are going to be held at the War Memorial. With us are Angie Rooks and Claudine Herodote. Claudine, I'd like to start with you first. Tell us who is sponsoring the French festival and what is your responsibility with this festival?
Okay, we have the French Festival Incorporated, and it is once a year at the War Memorial. It's a celebration, and we try to have it next to the 14th of July because of the French Revolution and French anniversary. And it's a group of volunteers holding this festival for 2 days.
But you're a separate entity as opposed to being a part of the Alliance, or?
Yes, it's a different organization. It has, there is no membership. It's only being a volunteer helping at the festival, and you are a member of the French festival.
Ah, and what do you do within that group?
This year I am the vice president, so I helped a little with the publicity, and I helped finding chairman for the food and the different kind of store that we have, the flea market, the boutique.
You know, Claudine, I have to smile a little bit because when you said, oh, I help a little bit, and I think getting chairman and getting all, that's a lot of work. You put in a lot more than a little bit of time, right?
No, but we enjoy it, and we work little by little. We make it every year.
That's right.
Their 17th year.
Yeah.
Oh, it is. Angie, what is your responsibility? How do you fit into this whole thing?
Well, this year I'm in charge of the entertainment, and for 2 days, and we try to have entertainment continuously from the time it begins Saturday at 12 o'clock till 8, and then Sunday from 11 to 6. Yeah. And the entertainment is as much as we can French in character. We have can-can dancers, young girls, and we also have a senior group, senior citizen group, which is very popular. We have...
Did they appear last year?
Yes. And
they were wonderful.
They can perform often, but not for very long, and that's because, but they are in very good shape. Then we have, this year for the first time, Anna Speck and Frank Hall, part of Opus 3, and they will be singing French cabaret music, and as you know, they are a wonderful, wonderful group.
I think when we were discussing some of the entertainment earlier, and you mentioned them, I just think that was a coup on the part of the French Festival Incorporated to get these two. They are simply outstanding.
I think some of the best voices in Detroit area. I was thrilled when I first met them. Then on the other hand, we have a group from two brothers from Windsor who have researched old French songs, folk songs, and they have done that by interviewing senior citizens, and they've learned, it's been a project with them, they've learned these songs, and they're going to be performing Saturday and hopefully Sunday as well. They have a harmonica and a guitar, and they've
a beret, I hope.
Yes, I hope so. We're very lucky to have the first Michigan Colonial Fife and Drum group, because they're leaving for Europe right after the program, and they're going to be performing Sunday morning. And they put on a review. They have authentic 18th century costumes and instruments, and they are rated as the best group of its kind in the Midwest. So we're lucky to have them. For the children, we have Punch and Judy puppet.
That's always fun.
Yes, that is, on Saturday. And we have the Judelaires, which is a local group, which will be doing Broadway-type review music. We have on the grounds, there's going to be a reenactment group of 20 people who will be dressed in 18th century costumes, and they're going to just live as they would have at that time, early Detroit. They will be doing some musket demonstrations, which was always lots of fun, a lot of noise. We actually have, I'm very proud of the fact we have magicians, we have a tarot card reader who is very good. Yes. And then we have a group of children who participated in the Grosse Pointe back-to-back group. Those children who took their had a 3-week exchange with a group of children, and they're going to put on a program that they performed in France. So they will be on for Saturday and Sunday as well. 5th grade students.
Okay, 5th grade, that's
And they went to a town in France that's very close to the Fontainebleau, and Claudine, the correct pronunciation of the town. Yes, and their teacher, Nancy Klein.
Vaux-le-Pénil.
Oh, okay.
So there are really more things than I can even name here. Oh, Charity Suchek will be here. She's going to do a food demonstration. She's a very popular cooking teacher here in Grosse Pointe, and she'll be doing a food demonstration on Sunday afternoon, and she doesn't know if she'll do crepes or summer salads or maybe both.
Oh, just to hear her is a treat, isn't it? It's never just cooking. It's always the story and the background and a presentation involved. Claudine, we talked about celebrations, and we talked about that we're not referring to American celebrations. If my history is correct, isn't France celebrating the 200th year of the French Revolution? And I guess when I think of the French Revolution, I always think of the Reign of Terror, and a particular picture that always comes to mind when they had the exhibit at the Art Institute, and they had Liberty leading the people. Tell us, refresh our minds about the French Revolution and
The French Revolution started in 1789 with the prise de la Bastille, where the people was hungry and started revolting against the power, against the king. So the first years the king was nice with the people. It's a way, not historical way to relate the revolution, but finally they did not agree, they did not come to an agreement, the people and the king, and finally the king was executed in 1793, and right after his execution there was the reign of terror, of course, which did not last all revolution, but between 9 months and a year. And after this led to Napoleon Bonaparte, but for 5 years France was in turmoil to have freedom, equality, fraternity, and the flag is from the French Revolution too. They took the white was the color of the king, and blue and red were the colors of the city of Paris. And they put the 3 colors together, and this gave the French flag, but it started at this time.
And what about the picture of liberty leading the people?
The picture was made by Delacroix. Delacroix started painting from the 18th century and about the people and freedom, and he painted this lady because liberty is feminine. It's a lady, and she carries the French flag, and she has on her head the liberty cap that we have here, which is a symbol of the French Revolution. It's an ancient, from antiquity, from the Roman time, when the slaves in Phrygia, this hat is called bonnet phrygien, the slaves in Phrygia, when they were freed, had to wear this cap as a sign of freedom. So it's this cap that the French people took as a symbol of freedom when they started revolting in the streets, because they were dressed as they did not want to dress as the king or as the noble people, so they chose kind of dress for them.
Well, that is interesting. Now, that was a little fact I didn't know about. And as we think of celebrations, I think there's another centennial celebration, which is, if I remember correctly, a celebration of the French Revolution, and that was the Eiffel Tower.
Yes, the Eiffel Tower is 100 years old. It was built in 1889 when Paris decided to have a world fair where all the countries in the world who wanted it had something to show to the world, and the French built or asked an engineer called Gustave Eiffel to build something which showed what progress could do, and he built this iron tower, and this was kind of controversial because, of course, it was not like the monuments they had in Paris. It was completely new, and in fact it was even decided they will destroy it after the fair. Yeah, it was only for the fair, and they kept it, and now it's a symbol of Paris, and they celebrate 100 years.
Angie, did I understand that you have just recently seen
Yes, it is completely renovated. It was closed down for a number of years for this renovation, and the French have used a different technique of lighting it, and it is absolutely beautiful. It's just beautiful. And it's interesting that that they were going to tear that down. They still have that controversy now about the new pyramid in front of the Louvre. The French are just besides themselves. But I think they'll accept it just as they've accepted the Eiffel Tower. Maybe it'll take 100 years, I don't know, but I found it very interesting.
Well, that is interesting. The other celebration, and I hesitate to say a celebration, Angie and Claudine, because it's more on the gruesome side, and I think the guillotine is also celebrating its 100th anniversary, its centennial. Yet, if I remember correctly, the guillotine was always with us in some form or another, or an executioner. What made this different?
I don't know, because the guillotine existed before in Italy, for example, before the French Revolution, but at the time of the French Revolution, you had two ways to kill people. The nobles were shot.
Can you imagine on Grosse Pointe Cable we're discussing how to kill people? But go ahead.
And the people were just killed by an axe and an executioner. So this Dr. Guillotin was a representative of the people at the assemblies, proposed, because everybody was having idea, everything was free and everybody was coming with new ideas, and he came with this idea that the guillotine might be a clean way and make everybody equal in front of the law, in front of death, to kill people. So
symbol of equality.
Symbol of equality.
Because royalty was killed the same way as the common man, and I think that's so French.
Well, I think as the picture shows, they were, the doctor that gave his name to the guillotine was very circumspect. I mean, the head had a wonderful resting place, and the body could just be pushed right into a basket and eliminated, and a new set of baskets could be.
I think your listeners will be interested that we're going to have a guillotine at the French Festival. And for anyone who's so inclined, can have his picture taken as if he is about to
decapitated,
be decapitated.
Sitting right in.
I hope whoever's operating that is
stops at the right moment. You know, Angie, we've been discussing the French Revolution, and Claudine mentioned the hats that we see in front of us. Why did you bring them?
Well, we're hoping that our volunteers will wear them that day as sort of a symbol of the revolution. The women will actually be asked to wear these bonnets. By the way, Claudine had volunteers to her home, and they made all of these.
Oh, is that interesting?
This is a bonnet for the women. And
now, could you show this symbol? What is the symbol right in the front?
Oh, it's what we call the cocarde. It's a symbol representing the flag. Blue, because we say it the other way that you do. We say blue, white, and red because of the flag. So this was the sign that they were fighting for the flag and for the Republic and for freedom. So you have it everywhere. You find it on the old caps and hats.
Now, the other design that's on our model, is this for the male volunteers then? Or is this...
Well, Liberty wore it, but I think that's what our plan was. And, you know, the festival cannot operate if it didn't have its volunteers. I mean, it's a volunteer organization, and we have such a wonderful core group of people who come every year to work. And we hope to always have new people as well, and younger people, and to take over some of these, well, exciting jobs. It's a lot of fun, really.
But can I tell you, Angie and Claudine, women will not wear that, regardless if Liberty wore it or not, because can you imagine what that would do to your hair? Perhaps both of you could tell us where the funds go that you raise during this festival, because and I've been a participant of the festival for years, and there are always wonderful crowds, and so how do you use your funds after expenses? Because I realize you certainly can't get all of these performers to do it without some compensation.
Well, in 1976, when we were having our own bicentennial, the French Festival funded the reenactment of Lafayette Landing in Detroit. We have financed the...
You had elaborate costumes.
Very elaborate, yes.
Okay, I do remember that.
And we had, that was our bicentennial contribution to, and that was landing down at Hart Plaza.
Right.
You remember they came down with canoes, and just as Lafayette did. And then we financed the French room at Wayne State University. We have contributed, and we are still contributing to the construction of a diorama at the Historical Museum. We've provided markers for various French historical events in Detroit. Our last big expenditure was for the Lafayette bust, which is now at the War Memorial. And then,
That's
Claudine, I
right.
think you had a few other things written.
Yes, the Grosse Pointe Historical Society had some funds from us to buy equipment to research on old homes and old families from the French origin. And,
And you must realize this is all non-profit. All this money does go for
The community.
community. There are no vendors as you have it maybe at other festivals. No one is making money on the food except the festival committee to use money for these different purposes we've just mentioned.
You know, having participated in the French Festival, I know there are so many other things in addition to the programs. I mean, the singers and the dancers and the entertainers. Give us an overview of what some of the other activities are that we can expect at the French Festival.
Well, a very big portion of it is the food, and I'll let Claudine talk on that.
Not on the food yet.
But we have the flea market, which, you know, we really do get a great number of people to contribute when they are doing their spring cleaning. Some really very nice things. And that is very popular. In fact, I can remember one year when we were unloading the truck, the volunteers were completely surrounded by people grabbing things. I mean, there really are some nice things for the flea market. We have vendors who do come in and sell jewelry, and we have an art exhibition. We have face painting for children. We try to do a lot of activities. The boutique, yes.
Which sells the quality things from France.
And we have demonstrations of different.
And I think you also have a raffle.
Oh, the raffle. This year are 2 round-trip tickets by Northwest from Detroit to Paris. So that is one I'm going to be buying myself. That is a very big. And a number of other lovely prizes as well.
Oh, that's wonderful. Now, let's talk about the food. I'm thinking that it's the French Festival is always held in July. It's usually a hot time. How do you recruit the people that are doing the cooking and the bringing in the food and all the baking?
Oh, we don't have any problem because everybody has fun and everybody wants to work. So we always we have shifts, for example, to make the crepe and to cook the crepe because we cook them on the spot. The day before we do some preparation, we cut the strawberries for the crepes, for example. We clean the salad, all the lettuce we need for the salad niçoise.
We get up at 4 in the morning to go to Eastern Market. And that's part of the fun.
Friday, yes. And this year it's the 14th of July. When French people don't work, I'm going to work. And so we prepare the day before, but most of the cooking is done the day of the festival. So, but it's fun in the kitchen too. You know, we make crepes and we have kind of a contest who makes more crepes. So the crepes are made after 2 days, and the salad niçoise are prepared, and the patisserie are unloaded. The patisserie is some of it is bought, like croissant and brioche, which has to be made the same day, so we cannot do this. But we have a lot of patisserie homemade by our volunteers. So when they come to work, they come with some patisserie, some cakes and cookies, and the cheese sandwiches are made also on the spot. They just cut the cheese, put butter, and slice the French bread.
You know, when you mentioned the pastries that are brought in from the volunteers, I remember stopping at Dorothy Newhouse's place last year, and I think it must have been 110 outside. And there's Dorothy in the kitchen making these madeleines, is it, and other little cookies, and the perspiration is just rolling off her face. And I said, Dorothy, is this the time to be baking? And she said, it's for the French Festival. I mean, I felt like taking the flag. And
but you know, this is what's so wonderful about it. The French Festival is actually authentic. You do not get pizza, you do not get kielbasa, you're going to get French food, and prepared fresh and by volunteers right on the spot. And that's what's so nice about it. It's like a little French country fair that you would expect to participate in if you were traveling in France. And that's really one reason I do like to work this festival.
And that's what I found, and then we have so much pleasure to be there with all my family. The kids are by themselves for today. My husband is by himself for today, but we are in a nice nice place and a nice ambience, and everybody's working, but it's really a nice time. And like the kermesse in France that we have in a small village once a year, there is a feast like that. All the village contributes, it's all volunteer, it's for the poor, or can be for the church, whatever. So it's really the same thing that we find here.
It's really a family affair because there's something for everyone. And I love it when Claudine's children were little, they would be dressed in little French costumes, selling balloons, and, it's a very nice sort of country day in Grosse Pointe.
Claudine, let me ask, where did you originally come from?
Oh, I was born in Algeria when Algeria was French, and when Algeria became independent, all the French people went over to France. So in my teenagers, I was in Nice, where I studied and where I married, and after all over France, I moved all over, and I moved in the States 8 years ago.
Is your husband French then?
Yes, oh yes, and the children are French too.
Well, yes, one would. Oh, that's interesting. I thought perhaps you had married an American and then come over here.
No.
Oh, and where does your interest in
Well,
France?
I'm so glad you asked.
Oh, good.
My
Wasn't
family
even on
came
my
from
list.
Italy, and at one time I was the food chairman, and people would question why a person of
that's
Italian background was in charge of the food at the French festival. And I always had to tell them the story that Marie de Medici was an Italian, and she introduced cuisine to the French when she married Henry IV. She introduced how to use the knife and fork, and she brought all her chefs from Italy because she thought the French could not cook. But then, of course, the French, in their wonderful way, just took the ball and
They
they ran.
steamrolled
and
right over.
Oh, yes, they just really. But it did begin with the Italians.
Do you speak French?
No, I don't. I can read it somewhat, and I would love to speak it, but I just never studied. I started to study with Claudine, and then for personal reasons I had to stop, but I feel I will because I'm going back next year, and I really would like to converse.
Well, I think it's interesting, though, Angie. I think you're what I would call a goodwill ambassador for France, because when we were chatting before we started the program, you said that you always enjoy showing people. I think you're taking a niece next year, and you said, I want to show her. And I could just see all of France unfolding beneath you.
Born teacher. I think it is absolutely a most beautiful, beautiful country, and sometimes people say the French are so arrogant, but you know what? They have something to be arrogant about. It is truly a beautiful country. And what they've done, they're perfectionists in food and style, and it just shows.
It certainly does. You know, here we've talked about the revolution and the Eiffel Tower and the guillotine, and we've discussed everything that's going to happen at the French Festival. But what we haven't discussed is, when is it?
Well, it's July 15th and 16th. That's Saturday and Sunday. Saturday from 12 to 8 at the Grosse Pointe War Memorial. And by the way, I mean, it's air-conditioned. I don't know of any other French festival. And on the shores of Lake St. Clair, which is so beautiful. And then Sunday from 11 to 6. And that's...
Well, and you know, you mentioned, we mentioned about the funds being raised for this, the purpose of the festival. But how much does it cost to get in? I mean, there must be some sort of an admission charge.
No, that is the nice part of it. There is no admission charge. So we do hope people will come. We make our money on the food and on the sale of the flea market and those other items. And we encourage people to come right after church on Sunday and have brunch or have their dinner and come on Saturday because that's how we make our money. We do not charge anything. And you can sit there, and as the French, you can order a cup of coffee in France and sit there all day. Isn't that right? We yes. We never move anyone from a table. You can sit there from 12 to 8 and watch all that wonderful entertainment and maybe just buy a cup of coffee, but maybe a croissant too or something else.
Well, if you're going to make your money off of the flea market and all the various other things, and including the food, is it really, are the prices then outrageous?
No, I don't think so, because we try to compare. For example, we have hot dogs for the children because we're a newcomer family with 6 children, and it's what they enjoy, and we cannot ask them to really.
But we don't call them hot dogs. No, we don't call them hot dogs. We call them.
But we try to keep the same prices than the not fast food, I don't know if they sell hot dog fast food, I'm confused about this, but whatever. And for the salad niçoise, we don't charge as much as the salad.
Oh, and they are works of art.
And the crepes, since they are homemade with a lot of strawberries, fresh strawberries. Now, I don't think we keep reasonable on the price.
We try to keep the prices down.
We want our customers to come and to come again every year, so we don't want to be too expensive.
Well, that's wonderful. Let's just say that again. The dates are July 15th and 16th at the War Memorial from 12 to 8 on Saturday and 11 to 6 on Sunday.
That's correct.
And I think this has really been a wonderful opportunity to speak with Claudine Herodote, who is from France, and Angie Rooks, who is of Italian descent. And here I am, Johanna Gilbert, as a part of German background, and I think, isn't this a wonderful ecumenical type of a push for the French festival? We hope to see you there, and we're thankful that Claudine Herodote and Angie Rooks joined us. Do you feel your toes tapping, your body moving? You feel a little up and happy. The music you're hearing in the background is called Fidgety Feet, and our guest today recorded it. And we're able to listen to some of it as we begin our conversation with Chet Bogan. We're delighted that you could be with us, Chet. You know, I guess there isn't a person perhaps in Grosse Pointe that doesn't know of you and your tremendous skills. But I want to get right to the heart of the matter. You know, were your parents professional musicians? Are you just simply a child protege? I guess one would have to say, what started your love of music?
Well, my parents both enjoyed music. My grandfather was a professional bass player in Europe, and they just encouraged me when I was about 10 years old to take accordion, and but they always sort of monitored me to become a physician. And there was a physician in our community who was, his name is Dr. T. Dissaz, and he was a violinist and a physician, and they wanted me to be like that.
That was your role model, huh?
Yes.
Well, then your parents wanted to say, my son, the doctor, right? Well, then, when you started your lessons, did it really just kind of grab at you? I mean, you just love to practice and to become better acquainted with the accordion?
Well, I found it very, very easy, and there wasn't any problem my parents forcing me to practice. I would practice 2 hours a day. During the summer, I would even practice 4 hours, 5 hours. And I enjoyed music a lot. And by the time I was about 13 or 14, my music teacher had me go out and play some engagements, and because apparently I had enough of a repertoire to play for a private party.
You know, Chet, I don't think this program should run at 10 in the morning or at 8:30 at night. I think this program should be screened at 4:30 in the afternoon when the kids are home from school, just to hear you say that you practice for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. I think that's
what it takes.
Oh, I think that's amazing. Well, how did you manage to keep up with your practicing? I mean, that's a lot of work. And your academic studies, did one have to take, like, second place?
Very good question. I preferred music to athletics. In fact, when I eventually did go out and play baseball with the with the boys, I just didn't make it. I didn't make it. Tennis, the racket is too small. I mean, I'm not coordinated. Golf, I tried playing golf, and the first game I played, I lost something like 15 balls. Really, it's the truth. And so I decided I'd rather be a good cornet player than a golfer.
Gosh, all of the stories of our lives. Did you ever seriously consider making music your vocation?
Well, many people tried to encourage me to go into music. My parents and I pretty much were settled on being in the medical profession, and it was only until about, I think I must have been about 13 or 14 years old, and I went to our new neighborhood dentist, who was Dr. Jessen, and he was so kind. Previously, the dentist hurt me, all right? And he was so kind. He talked to me, and he took me into his laboratory, and what he did a gold inlay on me. At that time, cost $6.
Wow.
Okay. And so I came, when I arrived home, I said, I'd like to be a dentist. And say, whatever you want.
That's still medical.
Yeah. Yes. And that's the way it happened. And, of course, during high school, I had a band, and it was very popular. And at that time, there was a Bowery nightclub in the city here. And they had Sophie Tucker was there, and Sinatra and so forth. It was in Hamtramck. It was a big nightclub, seated, I think, 2,000. Well, on Sundays, they would have various local bands during the 40s appear there. These were so-called contestants. Well, we won that contest. And we won a one-week engagement at the Bowery, and then we were supposed to go to Ohio on tour, but the war broke out, and so it changed our plans.
This was in your high school? I mean, that...
In fact, I was playing for my high school prom, and I had to appear at this nightclub at 1 o'clock, and we really had to hustle. And Evelyn, who was my wife, was at the prom, and she helped move our band.
Well, she was a faithful helpmate already, huh?
Certainly
When
was.
the war broke out, did you continue on to college, or did you...
Yes, I went to University of Detroit in pre-dental school, and then I joined, I enlisted in an enlisted reserve, which was a program where you would study and then go into the service. And but programs, federal programs, change, so they called everybody into the service, and they made me a dental technician. And that's what I was until the end of the war.
So you didn't have any part of music, is that right?
Well, I was a dental technician, but naturally I would go into service clubs, and when I appeared a few times, sat in with a few bands, this one captain decided I should be in special services in addition. And he organized a group with some very excellent musicians, Joe Jones of the Count Basie Band.
Is that the picture that we're seeing now?
Yeah, and Lester Young, who was 15 years in the downbeat pole, a tremendous musician, and Turner on piano and myself on trumpet. It was a quintet. And so I had lots of fun. This was in Fort Ord until the war ended.
Goodness. And the other picture that you brought from your Army days, that's Count Basie himself, isn't it?
No, that's Louis Satchmo Armstrong.
Louis Armstrong, of course. Oh, gosh, Chet, that's... Oh, goodness, I can't see straight right now. Oh, that must have been a wonderful experience. Were they encouraging to you?
Oh, yes. Lester Young said he played like Red Allen. And I never heard Red Allen, and they encouraged me to stay in music. And but when I returned and we married, Evelyn and I, and she attended Marygrove, and I went to U of D.
My goodness. And you still were focused on being a dentist. Your family was still encouraging you. And surely at this time, your music must have taken a back seat as you were involved in your studies.
Not at all. It paid for the studies. And it was very nice because many of the students at dental school had jobs, and many of the jobs are very demanding, like 6 days or 5 days. And I just did maybe 2 nights professionally in music, and which didn't take me too away from my homework, and I was able to do both and survive nicely.
That's incredible. I just think that's another facet of your tremendous abilities, because you really have to be organized in order to juggle. Well, you're married now, you're going to school, and you have a band to be responsible for. Was this were you always organized, or is this a skill you acquired through necessity?
I had very organized parents, and my father was a small builder, and let me tell you about that. So when I returned, Evelyn and I lived with her folks for a while until we found an apartment. And then one day, my dad and I spoke, and I said, I'm going to build a house. So I did build a house. And of course,
was this a real house, or?
It was a real house, you know. And the house was kind of rare right after the war. That is, people would be milling through it as it was completed and making all kinds of offers. Before you know, I received an offer that I could not refuse. So the only problem was I spoke to my dad, how am I going to tell Evelyn that I'm going to sell the house that we're building for us? And he says, well, there's a couple of lots around the corner. And this was in the Otter Drive, Van Dyke area. So I told her that we moved into an apartment, and then I built 2 houses. And I got a license, and I was a builder until I graduated dental school. In fact, my office was the last thing of my building career.
Oh, gosh. You know, I'm going to get right back to that dentistry bit, but I think, are you married to a saint? I mean, here she went to Marygrove.
Yes.
I mean, she sounds just incredible. Does she play in your band? I mean, is she a musician? Does she have all these ties with you?
She appears with me at Fine Arts, and she's written at least 2 scripts for musicals at Fine Arts Society, and one was done last year, was called An Evening at Pick Fair, and she also played the role of Jean Harlow in that very well. I should have brought a picture of her in her Jean Harlow outfit.
Isn't that something?
And we've also been putting on little shows in Bethany College in West Virginia, and she's written some scripts for that, and I've sort of collaborated the music for that. It's sort of a variety weekend where 70 or 80 people from all over the country meet in this college town. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, that certainly would be. Is this like a fundraiser, or it's just a kind of a getting together?
No, just getting together from California, from the East Coast, and many were performers, and many were corporate heads, and it was just a great. In fact, we're planning to do that this August also.
Isn't that wonderful?
And Evelyn also sings in a group called the Choraleers, Margaret Lindner's group, and she enjoys that.
Well, you certainly married the right woman. I mean, if I had married a man that was working as a dentist or going to school and then doing gigs at night and doing all these other things, boy, that really would strain a relationship. But she seems to survive, doesn't she? Let's get back to that dentist. Here you're now a dentist, and I just heard that the last thing you did was build your dental office. Music never stopped, though, huh?
Well, yes, in 1953.
I like that.
I mainly worked at the office, and then about 1958, I joined the Players and Fine Arts Society. But those first 8 years, I was mainly in dentistry. I didn't have time for anything else.
You know what I could just imagine, Chet Bogan, is that as your patients are sitting in the chair, because at that time they didn't have these wonderful recliners and all this high-tech stuff that they have today, but I could just see them sitting in the chair with earphones on, or headphones on, probably listening to your current band performing something while you're busy drilling out cavities.
No, it never happened that way. For dentistry, I had real bland, nice music, Mantovani, Castellanets, Alfred Newman.
Nothing to excite the soul, huh?
Nothing to distract.
Oh, gosh. Well, you know, I guess one of the things that I'd have to touch on is with all of these happenings in your life where music was concerned, and costs are now, like, starting to go up. Was there ever a thought that perhaps with all the production costs that were increasing that you'd ever have a chance to record? Did you ever record?
Yes, I have 3 albums, and we're almost ready to have a 4th album.
You know, are these the 2 albums that we have sitting before us and are on the screen now?
Yes.
Tell us a little about them.
Yeah, well, Volume 1 we did in 1978, and that was done in the studio. And that ran lots of money. So when I was ready for Volume 2, I organized my own studio, my basement. And Volume 3 was also done there.
You know, Chet, I'm jumping way ahead of myself, but I didn't realize that necessity is really the mother of invention where you're concerned, because when costs are too high for a studio, you organize. I mean, there really isn't anything you can't do. You're a builder, you're a dentist, you're now a production manager.
One reason I did have the studio, not only to cut costs, but it would give me more control where I could really take time and strive for more perfection. When you're in a studio and you're paying big bucks per hour, you tend to go fast. Mm-hmm. And so this is one I wanted to have my own studio where we could go at a easy pace without any pressure.
Tell us about the Dixieland. No, it's the Wolverine Jazz Band with Dixie Belle. Where did you find all these people?
Oh, they're just fine musicians throughout the city that I've gotten to know over the years. And it's just been a joyful experience, and they all enjoy performing. And
where have you performed? I mean, are there any like big dates that?
Oh yes, we appeared 3 different times at the Great Sacramento Jazz Festival, which is in California, held Memorial Weekend, where 70 bands from all over the world. They have bands coming in there from behind the Iron Curtain. And it's amazing, they all play in the Dixieland fashion. Apparently they get these records of Jelly Roll Morton and Duke Ellington and then just copy them. There was a Japanese band there, too. And then many great local bands, that is, American bands. Mm-hmm. So we were there 3 different years. The Big Beiderbecke Festival in Davenport, Iowa, is also a very large one. They attract, upwards of 20,000 people in the audience for that, and we appear there 3 times. And St. Louis, Indianapolis, many other nice places.
Interesting. What's one of your favorite recordings? The Butter and Egg? What?
Yeah, Big Butter and Egg Man.
Big Butter and Egg Man.
It's not only my favorite, but many of the people that come into Toledo, it's one of the most requested numbers.
Isn't that interesting? I think we're going to hear just a little segment of that coming over, and I just, maybe we can just sit for a minute and listen to the strains of Butter and Egg Man, and you can tell us then what's going on here.
I'd be happy to.
There it comes.
I want big butter and egg.
Oh, that sounded like Dixie Belle, right?
That certainly was.
Now, that's a favorite of your audiences here in Grosse Pointe, Toledo, and wherever you've played it.
Yes.
How did it become a favorite? Was it like one of your group's favorites?
No, just the audience just caught on and just liked it.
Isn't that interesting? Now, you were telling us that here you're involved in fine arts, and you're just, Evelyn is busy writing scripts and acting. What are you doing in the meantime?
Oh, I'm very active with
I can imagine.
With my music. I'm doing a project now with noted soprano Alice Truscott on a classical number called The Highwayman, and which is a poem written in 100 years ago by Alfred Noyes, noted English author, and my daughter got me the poem to read because I asked her that I wanted something that I could write some serious music to. And she thought for a moment and returned later on that evening, and she said, "That's it." And so I read the poem, and I was really in love with the poem, and I wrote this music. It's 14 minutes long, and eventually it'll be on a cassette.
You mean it's a classical piece?
Yes.
You're composing now, in addition to everything else?
Well, I've composed other songs, too, over the year,
wow.
and commercials and things. In fact, I had the opportunity to play for Billy Rogel's retirement party. He was our shortstop and councilman in the city of Detroit, and it was called I Like Detroit.
I Like Detroit. I think we have a copy of that here in the studio, that maybe when you tell us the story of Billy Rogel, we can listen to that strains of I Like Detroit as well.
Yeah, well, there was a big party at the Cobo Hall. There were thousands of people there, and somehow they wanted my band to play for the event, and so I decided that I would write something that would be relevant to the city of Detroit.
Do you remember some of the words just offhand? But it's a very positive song. I remember listening to it in the sound studio, and I just thought it was such an such upbeat words about Detroit that I wondered how you must have like a little love affair though with Detroit itself.
Yeah, well, I mentioned all the high spots and the highlights of Detroit in it, and what a wonderful place it is. We have a tape of it here.
You're right, I can hear it. I can hear Dixie Belle singing, I like Detroit, I like Detroit. I think that's wonderful. You're just such a well-rounded individual when I think that music doesn't compartmentalize you. I mean, that you're just into Dixieland in jazz, but you are into composing, you're into production and recording, you're just very versatile in your interest span.
Well, I really like working with people. You know, I like to bring out the best in people too, and it gives me a big kick. And I like to please. And so, in fact, when I had this Billy Rogel party, no one even mentioned that. Would you write something? I just motivated myself and felt, and it was a highlight of the evening.
That is terrific. When you said you like to bring out the best in people, I remember a story that you told that of a woman who had not really sung before, but you just thought, and I'd like you to finish the story, you just thought that she would be terrific at it.
Yeah, well, she was active in singing, and she was a good musician, a pianist, and sang in choruses, but not in a solo capacity. And she had a very nice voice, very good voice. And so I encouraged her to have a rehearsal, and now she's blossomed out, and she's on her way.
You know, I think that's astonishing, Chet. I don't want to belabor the fact that you're a busy individual, because I think many people are busy. I know I am, and I feel that I'm organized. But I think when you give so much time, like to someone like this woman, and composing a song for the Billy Rogel Gala, and the other things that you have accomplished, like this 14-minute, you said only 14 minutes, but I think how long it would take to compose with background parts and to write out all those parts. Where do you find the time? And do you need a lot of sleep or little sleep, or?
Again, not playing golf twice a week gives me quite a few extra hours. And I do not watch TV as much as other people. And Evelyn has also a hobby of sewing. She's an excellent designer, and she's made many great costumes for some of the shows we had, and some of her own clothes. She doesn't like me to admit that.
Oh, okay, we won't
But
listen.
they're perfection. And so here she is working in her part of the house, and I am working at the piano.
Oh, that's a compatible marriage there. How long have most of the band members been with you? Do you pick up people here and there, or are these people primarily?
Oh, I've known these people, like, for instance, Bernie Katz, who is one of the most accomplished pianists in the world, as far as I'm concerned.
Me too.
And he's so proficient in classics, and he enjoys playing with my band because we're so disciplined, and we play in the 30s vein, and he loves that period. And it's organized. Normally, he shies away from jazz bands. Mm-hmm. And then I've known him for 20 years. Fritz Moore is an excellent saxophonist, clarinetist, and I've known him for 20 years. Mm-hmm. Most of the people that are in band. And then I have, like the drummer, Dan Mislanka. He's just a young man, just early 30s, but he already has played with the symphony at the Birmingham Theater, and they're all fine studio musicians. I'm really proud of them. Chuck Moss, the trombone. Frank Harrison, the tubist, he played with Clyde McCoy back in the 50s. And then, like if Dan Mislanka has a conflict where he's doing a show at the Birmingham Theater or Fisher, he'll send a sub who is also a studio man. And then fortunately I have everything arranged, which has taken years too. Most Dixieland bands play where the music is just free. So many times magic happens, but many times there's a lot of discophony and discord there. But in my band, all ensembles are very tight, and the musicians enjoy that.
Oh, I can imagine they would.
And so many times, if Fritz Moore is busy doing an out-of-town engagement, I'll get somebody that plays at the Fisher, and they come in there and they play, and the audience thinks that he's been in the band for years.
Isn't that great? You know, do you still have any hopes or dreams that you'd like fulfilled?
Yes.
At this what?
In 1980, my band was chosen to bring President Reagan on the podium at 7 o'clock at Cobo Hall. And I always wanted a return performance at the White House. And I never did, but maybe with Bush.
Well, we'll have to write that down, and we'll have to see what we can do.
But I think that would be fun.
Oh, that would
to do
be.
a command performance there.
Absolutely. Okay, we'll keep note of that, and then we'll keep track of you.
I'd even write a song, I Like Bush.
Okay. We'll also make note of that. You know, I understand that now you have certainly been in the great concert halls and festivals. Now you're heading for Orchestra Hall. How are you getting there?
Well, it's a benefit that's being held on June 4th, Sunday, and it's to raise money for to improve the lavatories.
Oh, those are necessities.
and they call it the Powder Puff Review.
Oh, no, that's a wonderful term.
And Dean Taylor is actively chairing that position. She's doing a wonderful job, and we hope it's a big success. And it's going to be lots of fun. There's going to be quite a few unusual situations created. There are fun things, plus some very serious music by the Detroit Symphony. Les Jacobs is going to do a solo, the tubist, and a few others, too numerous for me to mention right now. And then we're going to close the program, and this is on Sunday, June 4th at Orchestra Hall.
I guess the other thing that I'd have to ask you right back to back with your Orchestra Hall appearance, do you ever say no?
I don't think so, no.
You know, Sparky Anderson is in California resting up because Dr. Livingood said that he had overexerted himself. He was insomniac. Was suffering from insomnia, and it was because he was so overly committed. I mean, it sounds kind of like you're one busy guy.
I don't have any trouble. Evan says his head hits the pillow and that's it.
He's gone.
He's gone, yeah.
Oh, that is amazing. What is your real love, though? I mean, are you just, you want to keep promoting your band and you want to keep performing? Is this what direction your life is taking now? I understand you're retired, right?
Yes, I retired as of last August after being 38 years in dentistry, and I loved every minute of it.
Oh, gosh. You were a wonderful dentist.
And I had some super patients, and I'm still getting letters and notes, which really make me feel good.
Isn't that? Now, that is an outstanding commendation on your service. So now in your retirement years, you're keeping as busy as possible, arranging music, recording music, playing concert dates, and do you have time for anything else?
Oh, yes. We're doing some traveling now, more traveling. And we have a wonderful daughter who is a bank officer at Valley Bank in Arizona. She's an MBA, and we visit her quite a few. And we're going on we're going on a cruise in October. And we're taking a few trips between now and October.
That's wonderful. I think all of us can really appreciate what Chet Bogan has not only contributed to the life in the music world, where his Wolverine Jazz Band has been a stellar attraction, for instance, at the Sacramento Festival, but he's also contributed so much of himself to our community with all of his activities. And we're going to leave as the strains of one of his songs floats over the airways, and we can quickly say we're delighted that you were here with us, Chet Bogan.
I was very happy to be here anytime.
And, well, maybe you'll come back when you play at the White House, okay?
Great. It's a date.
Great things are happening all around. There's no place I'd rather be. I like Detroit, and it likes me. The guys are sharp and the gals are neat. And that's a pair that's hard to beat. The kings of sports are all right here. The Tigers, the Lions, the Firefood Beer. It's the home of Gold Cup voters, Ford, Chrysler, General Motors, Hart Plaza, Cobo Hall, Renaissance Center, you have a ball. My Detroit is a good...
We've had any number of auto shows recently. The North American International Auto Show, which was held here in Detroit. The Chicago Auto Show, which naturally was held in Chicago. We're coming up to the Geneva Auto Show, and preceding all of these auto shows, there was the Paris Auto Show. With us today to give us an overview of at least two of them is David Smith, the editor of Ward's Automotive Report. Is that correct?
Ward's Auto World.
Ward's Auto World. Here I always thought it was Ward's Automotive News.
We have 6 publications and people get them mixed up. But Ward's Auto World is a monthly news magazine.
So it's the umbrella for all these others?
Well, no, each one has its own niche marketing, I guess you'd call it.
Oh, that's interesting.
But we have 6 magazines in total.
Well, then just here this wasn't a part of our interview, but then does Crane's Auto World compete with you?
That is Automotive News, and they do compete with us. They only have one publication. It's called Automotive News, and we have 6, which are competitors in one way or another with Automotive News.
Ah.
But they're separate types of publication. One is an international automotive publication dealing with the whole world perspective. We have one for auto dealers. We have Auto World is if you want to look at it as a Business Week Time magazine kind of a format.
Mm-hmm.
We have Ward's Automotive Reports, which is a statistical newsletter, and we have one on engines, and we also have a yearbook, so we have quite a variety of publications.
You cover the whole gamut.
Yes, and I'm editorial director of the group, so I kind of have to keep an eye on all of them.
Oh, that is impressive.
Oh, it's a lot of work.
It is. Well, a lot of work. I just think in the last month you've covered 2 auto shows. You were here with the North American International Auto Show in Cobo Hall, and then you just came back from Chicago covering that.
And leaving for Geneva shortly.
Oh, how I envy you. Do you think we could transfer this program right over there?
Everybody likes to go to Geneva.
How were you able to digest both shows? Is it just a matter, I mean, basically you'd have to have the same cars, more or less?
Well, automotive companies being the marketing types that they are, they didn't show everything in Detroit.
Right.
They did because it was the first international show. Several of the companies did show brand new world premier cars, and in particular the 2 that stand out are the Toyota Lexus line of luxury cars and the Nissan Infiniti luxury line of cars, both of which are coming out later this year. And they chose Detroit to unveil those 2 car lines. And there were a lot of new concept cars in Detroit as well. The Pontiac Stinger, which is a wild little machine it's kind of an advanced tech dune buggy. That was shown. And there are several other concept kinds of cars, but real cars, the ones that are actually going to the market, the ones that stood out were the Lexus and Infiniti models. And in Chicago, they saved a few for Chicago.
What I wanted to ask you, though, is that what made ours the International Auto Show, the North American International Auto Show, the introduction of the 2 new Japanese cars, or the whole...
No, it was much more than that. The international press, to start with,
they really
in Europe and in Japan and Tokyo, the press corps is much, much larger than it is in the United States. People in other countries are much more infatuated with cars, and a lot of the people in the press corps are consumer-oriented kinds of writers who are writing about cars, you know, the features of cars, that sort of thing, as opposed to industry kinds of stories. So they're much bigger. If you go to any European show, 500 reporters is not unusual.
My goodness.
In the United States and in Detroit, you know, 50 would be a lot. This year, they registered over 900 people from all over the United States, Canada, and Europe and Japan and so forth. And the whole idea was to, I think in Detroit, was to break out of the parochial pattern that had been set for all those years, where it was basically a bunch of dealers got together and said, let's bring the public in and see if we can sell a few cars, as opposed to, let's add some panache and some sophistication to it. Let's get in the big leagues with Frankfurt and Tokyo and Geneva and some of the other, Paris. So the idea was to make it, here's the home of the auto industry worldwide, at least it still is, I guess, and why can't we do something that has some real prestige to it? And so that's what they did.
And you thought it was very successful then?
Well, just by numbers alone, they brought in a couple 100,000 more than normal. I think they normally get around 450 or so, and this year they got close to 650, so that's 200,000 more people, which meant the Detroit Automobile Dealers Association picked up some more income, obviously. But it created a heck of a lot of interest. and it made Detroit stand out more than it ever has in the past.
Here I thought we were on the cutting edge of progress, and this is what the automobile dealers were presenting to us, and not just trying to line their pocketbooks.
Oh, well,
a combination of both. Is that?
You know, it's interesting that almost all the shows around the world are dealer sponsored, even in Geneva. You know, it's the Swiss automobile dealers who sponsor the shows, and they try to sell cars too. But Detroit and Chicago, most of the U.S. shows have been, you know, let's bring them in, rock them, sock them, show them some models, titillate them, get them excited, and maybe they'll buy a new car. So really, the idea is to get people interested in buying new cars.
I think they were very successful.
I think so. This year, beyond the crass commercial side of it, if you will, was a bit of sophistication that went beyond simply trying to move iron, I think.
You know, when you mentioned about the new concept car, a couple of years ago, or more years than that, the Fiero was considered a real front runner in a new concept with the motor in the center of the car. I guess I never really found out what caused the Fiero just to plummet in sales. Do you have a grasp on that?
Well, there are many reasons. I think one was that it was not, I wouldn't call it ergonomically sensible car. Did you ever get in one and try to get back out of it?
Well, yes, but I
you have to be a lot younger than I am. I'll tell you that.
I have long legs, and I thought it was a torture.
It was not. It was not a user-friendly car for anybody over 14. I don't think.
And they don't get license.
It was a kiddie car. You know. No, but that's not the only reason. Ergonomically, I think it was really a tight package, and it was not something that there's no room in it. You know, there's room for two people who are about an average of 5'10" and weigh about 150 each, and there's no other room in the car. And but I think most of all, it was the market. Two-seaters in volume have never sold well anywhere in the world. Pontiac did sell 100,000 of those cars in 1 year, and that, I think they sort of hit about everybody who wanted that kind of a car. And then they picked up a few after that. But it got down to 40,000 and 30,000. It kept dropping. Plus, the competition was coming in. Toyota tracked Fiero almost from the beginning and came out with a much better car not long afterward, called the MR2. And it was a night and day kind of thing. What they did is the Japanese are so good at doing, and Toyota in particular, they looked at all the things that were wrong with the Fiero, corrected them, and made a better two-seater. And so that was partly competition, partly market saturation, and partly the fact the car early on was underpowered. People looked at it, Pontiac visualized it as a kind of a latter-day Mustang where you didn't need a lot of power. You wanted to have the aura of sportiness, but not necessarily the get up and go. It was underpowered. They corrected a lot of things. They made it more powerful toward the end. They made it more livable toward the end. But the competition, the market saturation for that kind of car, I think all those came into play to kill the Fiero.
Should we have a Fiero in our garage and keep it for another 30 years? Do you think it's going to be one of those?
Good idea. I'd get one. I'd get one. If you feel you can just sock one away they'll be worth something.
Oh my!
Just like Corvairs are today. I mean, General Motors made a lot of Corvairs for a lot of years,
right.
And now you don't see them anymore.
And then Ralph Nader came along and.
Yeah, but if you go to a car show or you go to even sometimes a neighborhood flea market or whatever, you'll see Corvairs priced very dearly these days because people kept them and kept them up. Fieros, I think, will be the same way. One of the nice things about the Fiero is it's always going to look good. It's like having plastic surgery. It never going to change because the body is plastic panels, so there won't be any rust on it, and they'll always keep that same color and so forth. So it should be, the car should look good 30 years from now.
I'll call you up in 30 years if I buy one and tell you. What do you think of the new Japanese models that were introduced at our auto show?
Again, as I said, the Japanese are very adept at looking at what you did wrong and correcting it and making it better. And so I think those cars are outstanding cars. In this case, they chose to target the Europeans particularly. The Nissan cars you would call them BMW killers, I think. They're priced more on top of BMW, and they have features and design and so forth that are mindful more of BMW. Toyota, particularly with its top model, took the Mercedes approach. And you'd think they almost had hired Mercedes designers because the cars are so similar to the large Mercedes models.
Is that the Lexus?
The Lexus.
Ah.
The top line. In fact, they even use the same numbers. I think they have an ES 450. I think it sounds a lot like a Mercedes model.
It certainly does.
It looks like a Mercedes model. The interior, the seats, it's a clone. Just like
is it priced
just like
in
the
a
Radio
Mercedes?
Shack Tandy's a clone of an IBM PC, you know.
Is it priced like a Mercedes?
No. It's
lower?
Well, of course. Everything is.
For a while. For a while.
No, well, I think they're always going to distance themselves. Both Nissan, both Infiniti and Lexus will distance themselves from the Europeans. They'll always be 10, 20, 30% under them. That's their target. They wanted to come in between. You can almost draw a wedge kind of a thing. American cars, even the highest priced American car now, except for the Elante, the Cadillac Elante, which is an unbelievable $58,000. Everything else is 30 and below. There's one Cadillac that's $32,000, and everything else is under that. And you can't even buy an American car for more than $30,000. So the Japanese went 30, 40, 50, and then they crossed over BMW in the 30s and came up under Mercedes, which is in the 50, 60, 70. There's some overlap. There's some cheaper Mercedes. You can buy a small Mercedes for about $30,000, something like that. But the idea was they would wedge between the domestics and the Europeans.
You know, I'm going to jump around here because I am a non-auto person. I just buy a car and hope it gets me from place A to B reliably.
Everybody has the same fervor.
Now,
even auto writers. And their wives.
And their wives, right. Why is it that we seem to feel that the Japanese are so such innovators and so safety conscious and workmanship conscious, when I feel it isn't that the United States lags behind these same capabilities, but somehow or another we don't seem to have that same ability to translate that we're in the car business for reliability and good looks and sportiness and all these other things as the Japanese do.
Well, the Japanese had a much bigger problem. They built junk for so long that it was just terrible. I can remember a long time ago, back during the Korean War days, when I was over there, and you could just walk by a Japanese taxi cab and pound on the hood, and your hand would disappear. It was like made out of tinsel or something. And they really were bad. And in fact, all Japanese goods were. Anybody who's over 40, I think, must be able to remember
that time, right?
Remember the junk that came out of Japan just like it's coming out of Taiwan now and Korea. Same, and Malaysia, same kind of thing. Just junk, and made a lot of people wealthy, but it was no good. And they had a long way to go, and the only way they were going to crack any market, in particular the United States, was to produce a better product. And so they set out to do that. It was a very
it was a national effort.
Strategy. Right? The strategy was to prove that they could make products better than ours, and they took the Germans on with cameras. I mean, who's the last person that ever bought a German camera? And yet the Germans own the camera business for years. You can't buy an American television set anymore at all.
Mm-hmm.
They're all made either, now they're being made in Korea. Japan's no longer the TV center, Korea is. So what happened is I think they had a long way to go, and to establish themselves in this market they had to have something better. And what they did, and as I said twice before, they are very adept at doing. They look at what you've done and they improve on it, and they just are masters of that. And so the real technical ideas are not coming from Japan. Most of them are still coming from Europe and the U.S., the innovations. But Europe and the U.S. are very slow to implement those ideas into, and to perfect them to a point where they're going to come out with cars that will have the new technology. It's not going to give you a big headache. The Japanese are just dedicated to doing that.
But you also said something that when they latch on to a new idea and they make it, these are my words now, they make it their own. So that implies that their workforce is behind that same concept.
Well, they have a great dedication in their workforce, much like we used to have in the 20s and 30s and 40s. You know, it was their union is very weak, so they don't have an obligation to the union. The Auto Workers Union is theirs. Hasn't been on strike since anybody can remember, and they do little things like go off on a peak for 24 hours and then go back to work and make up for the 24 hours they lost. They're not a very tough labor union. The UAW would laugh at them. Excuse me. And but it's the whole social fabric of Japan, and I've been there many times, tried to figure out what it's all about. Read a lot of books about it, and it's a totally different culture because of the tremendous variety of people in the United States, from all countries, all backgrounds, all cultures, and the size of the country itself, the history of independence and the individualism, all those things that we prize so much are really, when you're fighting against Japanese, are not necessarily great assets to have, because they work very homogeneously, and they have to. They have to rely on each other so much. First of all, there are very few foreign people in Japan.
That's true.
There are some Koreans, but they're considered as outcasts, and interestingly enough, they're Oriental and so forth, and maybe an American would find it difficult just walking along the Ginza to tell the difference, but they certainly know the difference. And so they work together because they have to. They have 120-some million people in a country the size of California. We have twice that population for the whole United States, so the density of population, just getting into subways and on trains and and in and out of hotels and so on and so on. It's a very system that very reliant upon cooperation among people, and so they wouldn't dream of some of the independent kinds of things that we do.
Are we kind of getting back on track, though? I think all the auto companies have laid off workers or tightened the work structure, and we seem to be in print saying, yes, we are making a more reliable car, and yet I think, I don't know.
Well, we definitely are. Our American cars are getting much, much better because they have to be. It's competition.
So it's the perception that now has to be overcome, that American cars aren't.
Yes, and also there have been so many alliances between the Japanese and American auto companies.
That's right.
You know, the Ford Probe whipping around the streets of Detroit is not a Ford. It's made in Flat Rock by Mazda. It's got a Ford name on it, and some of the design, the exterior design and the seats and so forth were designed by Ford, but the basic car is not a Ford car. It's a Mazda car. And GM has a whole bunch of them. You know, they've got this new Geo Tracker coming out, made by Suzuki. And they've got the Suzuki Sprint and the Isuzu Spectrum, and the joint venture car from California by Toyota, the Nova. All cars that were not engineered by General Motors. And the same thing, Chrysler with Mitsubishi has several cars.
So you think there's really, the world car is almost right here at our doorstep, right?
Well, the world car has been a concept kicked around for a long time. I don't think there ever will be a true world car. All of them will have to be modified for local markets. But yeah, you can do the basics. You can do the drivetrains, the chassis, the wheels, the tires, and so forth. And then you change the lighting and the bumper systems and things like that to meet local regulations or country or regional regulations. The world cars, it's kind of a misnomer, but it's been used for so often. But I think you're right. There are many examples of cars that can be built no matter where, whatever region of the world, with some tweaking locally.
That you can have like interchangeable parts.
Just about. Well, there's good examples. Ford is doing that right now. The Escort replacement for 1991 is a Mazda design. It will be built by Ford in Mexico and Wayne, Michigan, and somewhere in the east. But it's basically a Mazda 323 that's been modified by Ford to make the new Escort. So the new 91 Escort and the Mercury Tracer, which is the name of the car that will be coming out then, are basically Mazda cars. Again, with Ford doing the exterior design and the interiors, adding their styling tweaks. But otherwise, mechanically and technically, they are Mazda cars.
It's amazing. You know, though, when I think of world car, I always think of the VW as kind of that world car that took over.
I don't think you'll ever see one car like that ever again because the competition is just too tough.
It's too hot.
If you come out with a really nice, innovative little car like that, everybody in the world copies you immediately.
That's right.
And you're dead, you know. And Volkswagen, look what's happened to Volkswagen.
Yeah.
I mean, their Rabbit, when it replaced the Beetle back in the early 70s, was a darn decent car. It was the first really high-volume, front-wheel drive, small car, and now it's dead in the water. And not in Europe, still doing well in Europe. The Golf, it's now called, but in the United States it's doing very badly.
Yes, the whole company is doing badly here. What about Lexus? Are they going to have any problem with this copyright infringement suit that's being filed against them?
I don't think so. I think they'll settle it. I think
it's going to be
wise
wonderful
people
for
will
the...
sit down and a number will be thrown into a hat, be unfolded,
and resolved.
And the head will bob, and that'll be the end of it, I think. Even if it isn't, interestingly enough, in Chicago, we asked the question, well, all these cars have a very stylized L logo on them, and what do you do if you don't have the Lexus name? And the car will still start with an L because they're not going to change it.
They are enterprising.
They're not going to change all those logos.
Years ago, or a few years ago, Gordon Burek was saying that in the early 30s there was an auto show, and they had and I'm not sure if it was the Duesenberg or the Cord, and they had just designed a new concept of the car, but although they built the car, they couldn't get the motor in it. So they trucked it in and set it up on display, and it was the first time in an auto show that an elevated display had been used, much to the chagrin of Chrysler, who was now below this new car. And he said they just had so many orders that they couldn't fill because they didn't have the mechanical parts. So they sent each new owner a replica of this car in copper or brass and gave it to them as a Christmas present. Not one order was lost. Now I'm thinking that the Ford Thunderbird was named Car of the Year, and there it sits at some lot because of mechanical difficulties. Will they overcome that same problem as the Duesenberg Accord did in the early times?
Yeah, I don't think it'll be a big problem for them. There are a lot of reasons why Ford is riding high right now. Their reputation for quality, self-made in many respects, I think. You know, as long as we've got quality, as long as you say it long enough, people might start believing it. And, I'm not saying their cars are better, but it's also been a very concerted marketing effort on their part. Quality is job one. Everybody in the United States knows it, and they identify that immediately with Ford.
That's right.
And Ford has done a good job. I'm not denying that. I think it's helped them to have preconditioned the public that they build quality cars. As I said, whether they're that high or not is debatable. But so the people, the perception is, and also the Ford's perception, the perception of Ford is that they face the problems head on, and they did in this case.
That's right.
They learned from Iacocca, if they didn't know already. He's done that so many times. You know, when the odometer case. I mean, in so many cases where he he just copped a plea, and everybody loved him for it. So he could do almost anything and get away with it because he always was honestly and forthrightly admitted that he had the problem. So I think Ford is advantaged by that. Secondly, the cars are no longer there. They're gone. They've left Cedar Point so they can get ready for the cyclone summer season with the, or whatever they do down at Cedar Point.
Golly.
They're gone now, and they corrected the problems. No cars were sold that were still defective. One of them was a very minor one having to do with a bulb in the steering column, and the other one was a very major one having to do with the crankshaft and the engines, which were giving them a big problem. Interestingly enough, I don't know if this is true, but I was told that the solution to that problem came through a Japanese company.
Doggone it.
So those cars are gone, and the cars are very pretty cars. They may have other problems now facing them because the cars are priced higher than their GM competitors, which may hurt them eventually in the marketplace. I think they feel they're sufficiently different from the GM cars that they're worth more. But when you're shopping for a personal luxury coupe like that,
you are going to look at prices.
In the 15 to 20,000 range, if there's 2,000 or 3,000 to be saved, you might take the one that's less.
How was the Chicago Auto Show? Here we covered everything else except, was it, I know it was bigger because I think 995,000 people.
Yeah. Well, they bring in between 900 and 1 million every year, half for years. We used to always say it's because the people in Chicago had nothing else to do. But
it's a bigger community.
No, it's more of a Midwest show than Detroit's is. Detroit is a Detroit show, basically, with some Ohio, Indiana, Canadian participation. But we used to go to McCormick Place and just look down through the parking lots, and you'd see license plates from 6 or 8 or 10 states. It's considered a big deal for people who come from Iowa and Wisconsin and Indiana and southern Illinois and places like that, because there are no shows in their areas like this, and people who love cars love to go to shows. And you can't go to Sheboygan Falls, Wisconsin, and see all these lovely cars. You've got to go to Chicago, and they have a huge population to draw from, and they do a darn good job. The Chicago Auto Trade Association, CATA, as it's called, has done a darn good job for many, many years. I don't think the setting in Chicago, and I've been to it going for a long time, is as nice as Cobo Hall now that it's been redone. There's a warmness about Cobo Hall. There's a uniqueness about it in design. And
does Diane Edgecombe know you?
I know Diane.
I think she should just hear this, that's really wonderful.
Really, the difference is like going into a big warehouse, which is McCormick Place, compared to, I think Cobo Hall was like that before, more like a warehouse. Today, it has a lot warmer feeling to it.
It really does.
And it's a more stylish, McCormick Place looks like they slapped it up in about 30 days, and I think it was about 31 days. It's just a big old concrete building, and it just doesn't have much warmth to it. In fact, it wasn't very warm at all when we were there because it was cold with the wind coming off the lake.
Terrible
they were bringing all of the exhibits in, and had all the doors open. We damn near froze to death.
Here we were worried about how long this program was, and it's almost at its conclusion. But before we cut it off altogether, if you had your choice, what kind of a car would you drive, or would you feel kind of remiss at saying that?
Well, fortunately, one of the little perks of being an auto editor is that you get to drive a lot of different cars. So you don't own them, but you get the experience of driving them. And there's so many nice ones, it's hard for me to say, but my personal favorite for a long time has been a car that's been around for quite a while, and that's the BMW 635 CSR. It's about $60,000. I think when I first started longing for it was like $30,000. It's about $65,000 now. Everybody in the world's copied the design. It's just a great car.
We're going to have David Smith back, especially with the upcoming Geneva Auto Show, because time has run out, and we're just delighted that you took the time to come down and talk cars with us and auto shows. Thank you, David Smith.
Thank you.
What do you think when someone says to you, antique shop? Don't you have the same feeling as I did, that you imagine beautiful china, exquisite furniture, lovely vases, the usual things that an antique shop would hold? On one of my walks, I noticed a very unique shop. It had a mountain lion in it. It had a lovely lamp hanging that looked like something from the Middle East. It had so many interesting things that I thought all of you would like to meet the owner of Beaker & Stein, Bill Beaker. I'm delighted that we could come out here, Bill.
Thank you. I'm delighted too.
One of the things, not only seeing your shop, but also picking up your card, and it said specializing in the extraordinary. And I just knew that I had come onto something, because you certainly don't see the many items displayed in just any antique shop. How did you get into supplying a shop that had unique qualities? What is it in you that would relate to that effort?
Well, you know, I think the public gets weary of seeing the same general line of antiques all the time. And I know that over the years, as a private collector, friends would come up and see some spectacular pieces that I had and get very enthusiastic about it. And I think I reached a point when my collection kind of outgrew itself, and I thought these things were made to be shared and enjoyed, and it's nice to share them with the public and maybe sell some of them and upgrade my collection, and just one thing led to another. But I've always had a taste for the exotic and the unusual. I think it exposes you to the many facets of life.
That could be. But how did you get started? Did you start as a young child, or was this something that you just went into as an adult?
It seems like I can't really remember when I wasn't a collector or doing something of that type. Pinpointing it, I think I can remember back about 7 years old when somebody brought me a painting of a ship at sea, and it was damaged. And even at 7, I seemed to have the genetic principles to restore the painting, and did charcoal sketches and pastel drawings. And so word quickly gets around, and I continued that.
You mean word got around when you were 7, and people actually would say, Bill, can you help me out on this?
Sure. Well, my mother was a big boon there because, you know, she kind of capitalized on that, and she'd say, Bill does this and Bill does that, and they would bring me pieces and, you know, be surprised that I could do it. But the interest was always there, and when I was about 14, then I capitalized it a little more, and I started copying old masterpieces and designing jewelry and doing murals and things of that type. So it was always there, but I wanted to bring it to a polish. I can't remember when I wasn't interested in creative endeavors.
When you were doing these things, you mentioned that your mother was very supportive. Did they also support your, like, that was an early entrepreneurial characteristic emerging, and they kind of fostered that?
I was very fortunate. I had full support of my mom and my dad, especially my mother. She seemed to feed on this as much as I did, so she went right along with me throughout my whole life. I can't remember a time when they didn't. Unfortunately, my father passed away this year, but he did realize that I followed my dreams and that they did come true. I've always been a little bit headstrong and always wanted to do things my way, and I think that's the secret of success. You don't let anything stop you, and my mother could tell you that. But she was very supportive. They both were, and I'm thankful for that.
When I think of you coming into business, what kind of classes did you take in school to prepare yourself for this type of a livelihood?
Well, again, I got a lot of support, and I think my parents realized that my scope of the world just probably could not even function unless I was surrounded by creative things. I took 4 years of art history, fine arts majors, jewelry making, world history, 3 years of anatomy classes, 4 years of biology. This all helped me, of course, later for anatomical drawings and helping to copy the old masters and this type of thing, and original paintings. I belonged to the Cranbrook Institute of Sciences for many years. We took expeditions and field trips and museum series and movies. Cast Tech. I worked for Gumps in San Francisco for several years. Plus I had my own shop in Chinatown on the first block of Grant Avenue in San Francisco for over 15 years. So I've really had a lot of wonderful things happen to me in my life that pertain to this type of career.
Gosh, Bill, I'm just holding back the words because when you say you took 4 years fine arts, that you would art history, you took anatomical, what did you say?
Anatomy classes, San
So,
Francisco College of Arts
and
and
I
Crafts.
just think you must be 100 years old. Have you found the fountain of youth? Is that it?
If you want to know how old I am, I'm 47.
Oh my golly, we all better come
think-
here to the shop for this, to find out how to stay ever youthful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, painting classes, but I also understand that you do a lot of refinishing for not only yourself, but that you also refinish for other houses that need help, and you upholster. How did you acquire all those skills?
I learned at an early age that if I thought I had some talent, why should I pay somebody else to do it if I think I can do it myself? Everybody, can't do that, but I always gave something a try. No was never in my vocabulary, ever. The old cliche about the word can't, I just wouldn't say that. So I upholster, I do stripping, refinishing, I do porcelain repair with or without the pieces, frame casting, oil painting restoration, the whole works. Basically, I try to specialize in oil painting restoration and frames and do a lot for all the local auction houses. But I've done this for many, many years, actually 27 years in this business as antique and decorative arts consultant.
Well, are you self-taught in these? I mean, or did you take like adult ed classes and then develop your skills on your own?
All of these classes and colleges I told you about that I went to, I feel I gained polish and maybe some self-discipline. The talent was always there, but I think it's good to expose yourself to other people's ideas and give and take from it. It's really no such thing as an original work of art. It's all been done before, but you're giving an interpretation of something else that has been done. So I felt I learned a lot from other people in the schools. There were some artists that were better than me and some that weren't as good as I am, but perhaps they didn't know how to exploit themselves, or they didn't ever finish a canvas, or they didn't want to, number one, do their homework as far as art and antiques were concerned. And I think that's important because, first of all, it's more fun. Number two, how can you price and categorize something correctly if you haven't done your homework or know your geography or your history? How can you stand behind your merchandise? I feel that I can do all of these things. And it's given me a lot more enjoyment in purchasing a piece and being able to tell a client about it. And I think that adds to the enjoyment, don't you?
It certainly would. But just getting down to the nitty-gritty, like refinishing, that's not something you can just pick up because you have to be careful about the stain you're using, the kind of finish that you want to achieve. And how did you acquire those skills? Or something as basic as reupholstery?
Well, the upholstery, I did take classes for that, and that was also at the San Francisco College of Arts and Crafts. I basically, again, knew what I was doing, but they taught me a lot of tricks of the trade. I just find that a lot of people have tried it themselves, and they will bring me the mistakes that they tried at home. It's not as easy a job. If you've ever tried it, as you know, stripping can be a labor of love, and off comes a pile of goo. But I think the fun part is making, the veritable silk purse out of the sow's ear. You start with something you don't like and end up with a prize. Basically, in restoring furniture, in my opinion, a good quality important antique should not be restored over about 20% without losing some of its value.
Now that was going to be my next question, because I think I'm confused, and that's the reason I did bring up the refinishing, because there was an article in the paper many years ago that in Europe, particularly France, they don't mind refinished furniture. And in fact, they'll give you a certificate of authenticity saying that it has been refinished, that it is historically wonderful. And it doesn't seem to diminish the value of the piece. But here in the States, old is wonderful just as it is, and the piece might look absolutely terrible. Now, how do you resolve that dilemma?
Well, you're kind of going into a gray area there. First of all, I think that Europeans appreciate an antique for what it is, maybe a little more than Americans, but they've had a good deal more history to deal with, and a lot more furniture to deal with, where we've just had several hundred years of practice, and most of the styles we came up with were import ideas from foreign countries. I think the Europeans realize that if you're going to restore something, you're going to research the piece thoroughly, and you're going to, in other words, get it back to the original condition that it was made in. Try to copy the upholstery as closely as possible. Try and copy the patina of the wood, or at least conserve that. Where sometimes I think Americans expect things to be a little too perfect and squeaky clean. And I usually suggest to some of my customers that if they demand perfection in antiques, first of all, they're going to have to pay a premium price. Most of the pieces in our shop we try to buy in good condition, but sometimes unique pieces do show signs of age, and we restore them where necessary. But they're priced according to rarity and condition. Also, a lot of people don't realize that antiques have to be over 100 years old, and this isn't something that we dealers make up. This is federal law. Before 1956, I believe it was, they had to be 150 years old. But again, we can't confuse patina with the dirt on the finish, which is not, allowable. Many times you can take oil soap and a fine steel wool and go over a piece like this, and you will remove all the excess dirt layers, and it doesn't need refinishing. So I think the main problem is overzealousness. Somebody will get a piece that looks dirty, all of a sudden get out the paint stripper, get out the steel wool, and they've destroyed 50% of the value of the piece. A patina is the natural discoloration of woods. It has nothing to do with dirt. I get upset with people when they take a good piece. I see this repeatedly, especially in the turn-of-the-century carved oak pieces, which were real sleepers, and now they're really going up in the marketplace. But they have been put in dip tanks. And the problem with those are it loosens all the glue in the joints. All of the oil has come out of the wood. All of the surfaces look exactly the same, so you get no variations of wood color. So what you end up with is a antique piece that looks exactly like a reproduction, which is fine if that's what you expect and that's what you want, but I just think that you should go and buy the reproduction and not damage the piece. It should be done by hand. I do all of my pieces by hand.
Oh, I hate to tell you, Bill, when you bring that up, when these dip tanks came in for the first time, and we had been avid refinishers, we bought things at garage sales and estate sales, and if they were dreadfully scratched, we would refinish it. But that's hard work, and it's tedious work, and the kids would always get into things. And then the dip tanks came, and we tried one piece, and we brought it home in a very judicious manner because it was so brittle. I don't know if wood actually gets brittle, but it had just dried out so badly that it never really functioned again, and we did learn our lesson.
You'll never get the oil back.
No.
The problem is they lacquer over the piece as soon as it's dry without embedding oils into the wood again. So some 5 or 10 years down the line, the piece starts falling apart.
Oh, the lessons one learns the hard way. Let's talk about some of the pieces that you have in your shop here. I guess the first thing that struck me was that mountain lion. And I thought, now what is really a mountain lion doing in this store?
The mountain lion, yes, it's been one of my favorite pieces. Certainly not a middle-of-the-road thing, but nothing in this shop is. It's you like it or you don't. But the mountain lion is not an antique, but we have serious antique collectors, and we also cater to decorators and designers. And many times designers want something for a visual sensation. Now this piece, for instance, if I buy an antique piece of taxidermy that would have to be 100 years old, no one would want it. It would not be an attractive piece. They didn't really perfect taxidermy until about the 1960s. So this has an inner fiberglass mount, which gives the rippling muscles and the realism. The older ones were stuffed with straw or cotton or what have you, and they're not attractive. This is a 4th class world record mount. In other words, it's the 4th largest female ever shot. And this was also done before the Endangered Species Act. It came out of a private collection from a big game hunter in the 60s. And we had quite a collection in the shop, and they went very quickly, as a matter of fact. Something like this would be spectacular in, if somebody had a great big fieldstone fireplace in a big A-frame den with big beam ceilings in Traverse City, it would be marvelous, or an office. So all of these pieces take some imagination, and I think people tend to stereotype furniture. Sometimes this has to go in the bathroom, this has to go in the bedroom. It's fun to have pieces that are eclectic, that you can move all around the house.
Now, when I looked at the mountain lion, though, I have to tell you, I think that was one of the most beautiful, does one say, jobs of
taxidermy art.
Taxidermy art. The facial expression, everything about. Now, is that going to last?
This one will last because it was an expensive mount. A mount like this has about a $4,500 value. It's a very expensive process to tan something like that. Plus, just because I studied anatomy, and I also took many courses in zoology, because that would be my second love. And if I hadn't gone into antiques, I would have probably been a veterinarian or a zoologist. In fact, I raised exotic animals for the San Francisco Zoo.
My goodness. Well, and then I noticed the peacock in back of us.
Yes.
And this is a
small Indian blue peacock, and it was probably in the spring. Normally, when it was full grown, the feathers towards the end of the year would be about twice as long. But this is a beautiful mount. In fact, a lot of these animals are rented out for display purposes, and we rent them for shows. And they're valuable that way, or to add a touch of whimsy somewhere. In fact, this one was just used in a very glamorous hotel in Dearborn at a wedding reception, and it was placed on one of the banquet tables with wisteria branches with blossoms hanging over it, and the lighting silhouetted it against the wall, and it was very effective. It was done by a local decorator.
How about the camels? I mean, that is not a piece that's easily incorporated into a home. Now, how do you see them? Where do they come from?
Well, first of all, you have to realize I had all of these pieces seem perfectly normal to me, because I've been doing this for a long time. But the camels are off of 1920s carousel in the divider part of the center. And there's been a real strong interest in carousel art in the last year. Prices have just zoomed. This one is valuable because it has the original patina and paint. Nobody has ever touched it up. There are a few nicks that should be filled in. It's 9 feet long, but it does come in 3 sections. But my idea for something like this would be to place it on a plinth, such as the mountain lion, so it was about 20 inches off the floor. And can you imagine it as a headboard in the child's room? And you place a twin bed in front of each camel, and a beautiful little Venetian painted nightstand in the middle.
Well, that certainly would be different. That
Beautiful.
Yes, it would look interesting. And then I noticed the carousel horse. I mean, this is really, we are in the midst of a carousel revival.
And I'm happy to see it with these pieces, because I'm having trouble replacing my pieces for what I sold them for. Now, the carousel horse, I was very happy to get. In fact, I just read an article this week, and I think they set a new world record for a carousel horse in New York, went for $101,000. The more exotic the animals are, the more they will bring. For instance, a goat or an ostrich or a pig will bring more than the horse. But this is a real nice piece, but they're bringing top prices.
The other, well, I have to call it a sculpture, Bill. It looks like an Indian sculpture that's standing over there. Could you tell me about that?
The Indian Nodder. That's probably one of the most desirable pieces in the shop. The Nodder was made, I would say, around 1855 in Bombay, India. And it was done under British regime. It's a piece of Indian Victoriana, if you will. It's entirely made out of paper mache, and it's done in 4 sections, and it hangs on little wires, so it's perfectly balanced. And when you move it, she dances, and it was probably placed in a palace niche, you know, where the wind would come through the Moorish arch and kind of blow it, and she would dance. It's a very rare piece, and it was purchased by a friend of mine in London about 30 years ago, and finally I talked him out of it.
Oh, dear. How about the Chinese export chair that's directly in front of us?
Well, I did show you some Chinese export, but this one happens to be Indian export. And this, again, was made in Bombay, India, and it belonged to a prince. There were many princedoms in India, and of course there was no middle class there, so you had high-style furniture or you sat on a little stool or on the floor. But this one is made entirely out of 1-inch thick Padawak sandalwood. It's all hand-carved with leaves and berries and vines, and these pieces, even though they don't look strong, are entirely usable. This is as strong as iron. What makes this one unusual is that it's equally as well carved on the back as it is on the front, Johanna. And there was a point when I would find these chairs in the 60s when it was popular for decorators to spray them white, which I won't express my feelings about. If you've ever tried to get the white off, it's impossible.
Oh, you
this
couldn't.
one is in superb condition.
You know, before we go any further, when I looked at your card and I saw Beaker and Stein, did you select that name just because it went well together, or is there a Stein?
I'm amused that you noticed that, because I thought one time of calling it your Beakerstein. Like the glass Stein, because it does go well together. You noticed it. But that wasn't planned that way. Susan Stein is my partner and my sister, and she's a big help to me in the store, and she does the banking and the bookwork and helps me with the displays and buying and store activities, and it tries to keep me from spending too much money, which is a valiant effort indeed, but it just doesn't happen to work. But she does at least keep the books balanced. I don't like to do that.
I do see her out of the corner of my eye in the background there, and she's smiling broadly, as you said. She tries to keep me from spending money. Where do you get your interesting pieces? I mean, let's talk of, here I called it a Chinese export chair, and it's Indian export. Or the palace doll, or just the other things that you've shown us. Do people call you, or do you just have sources that you can say, I'm looking for an interesting piece?
Well, first of all, as far as the export pieces are concerned, these are all Victorian pieces, and some people will come into the shop and say, I'm looking for Victorian pieces, and I know they mean American Victorian, such as their grandmother had. But let's face it, somebody's grandmother owned everything in this shop. These are basically exotic Victorian. The Victorian period would cover 1837, when she sat on the throne, until 1901, when she died. The pieces of export were basically custom-made pieces for outrageously wealthy Englishmen, and they traveled to India or China and had these pieces custom made, and the carving on them indicated the amount of wealth they had. Then they were shipped over via clipper ship to England. So they have interesting backgrounds.
That is. But where do you get them? I mean,
I like to travel all over, and I think, you know, the old thing about water seeks its own level. People know I have interest in unusual pieces, and they call me. I go to Louisville, I go to New York, Chicago, and of course I have many, many contacts on the West Coast because of my years there. I think it's just I saturate myself with this, and I love what I do, so it kind of seems to come to me. It's not magic, but I spend a lot of time looking.
Well, you must. You know, something else that I'd like to, before we get into the chest over there, as we're sitting here and we're looking at all your very unique things, and we realize that just like oil paintings have suddenly gone up to 42 million because people say they're not going to make them anymore. For the young person today that's just starting out, what would you advise them to seek that's being produced, let's say that has been produced in the 60s, 70s, that would be worth looking at? Is there something that stands out?
I'll be honest with you, Johanna, I really don't think there's any real good pieces made after the 1930s or 1940s. The only thing I would warn people against, in the first place, if they're going to get a good quality, there's nothing wrong with new pieces, but if you're going to get the best quality new pieces on the market, it's going to cost more than the antique. So either get a good quality reproduction, be very careful about these catalog pieces or these series pieces that are you know, shown in the magazines, because they're not always good investments. Basically, buy what you like, but if you don't know what you're doing, get some expert advice, but know what your budget allows, buy something beautiful, and buy best of category. It's always better to have one good piece than 10 mediocre pieces. So buy the best that you can afford in a category that you choose.
This has been so interesting. Could you just tell us about the chest? Is that a chest or a desk, or?
It's a drop front Korean desk, and it has one of the wonderful Chinese fish locks that only the Chinese could have concocted, where you put a little key in the side and kind of twirl it, and the fish comes out the fish's mouth, and the desk drops down. This one is early 20th century, around 1910, of teak wood and brass. It's most unusual because it's so-called the deluxe model, and if you open the desk and the doors, it continues the wonderful brass appliques on all of the doors, and they're all fully lined. So this is a very good one. Not too many of these are around. The output of Korean merchandise wasn't to the extent of, say, the Chinese merchandise.
No. Well, this has been a wonderful experience. I think just seeing your nodding doll, which I would have never thought was a nodder, because it looked so elegant just standing there, and to see the Indian export chair, and then to see the animals, I mean, for the carousel animals, this has really been an exciting time. And the couch we're sitting on, I understand that you were the upholsterer on
yes,
that,
I
and
did this
finished
piece.
it, and I'm sure that every one of us has gained a lot of experience, and also a knowledge that if you're going to buy the best. We're grateful to Bill Beaker and Susan, sitting way back there, for letting us come in. Thank you for joining us, Bill.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
At Liggett School this week. They have an artist in residence, a composer, if you will, visiting them, and the composer's name is Dr. Joseph Person. And the person who brought Dr. Person, isn't that a play on words, is the music teacher of the middle school, Jim Homeyer. Jim, let me start off with you and find out, what do you hope to do with a composer in residence at Liggett School?
Basically, by bringing in Dr. Pearson, we're showing the students at University of Liggett School that there is life after graduation, that they can continue to compose, work in the arts, be as creative as they were in the school after they graduate, and still consider other careers as brain surgeons or presidents of the United States or judges. and still continue their artistic endeavors, and that they don't need to minimize that thought because they want to make a career out of something else.
I just want to announce that everyone has heard this on Grosse Pointe Cable for the first time, that there is life after school. But, you know, Jim, to me that sounds kind of an arduous task, if you will, because how is Dr. Pearson going to present these ideas to such a diverse student body as is in Liggett?
Dr. Pearson will play the compositions that he has composed. He'll play on the piano, talk about his life as a composer in New York City, and by virtue of the fact that he graduated from GUPAS, which is now part of University Liggett School, is sheer testimony that there is an opportunity for these people to go through a rigorous academic training, as we have at University Liggett School, and still continue to enjoy their artistic endeavors. So his presence here today is his testimony.
Are they going to gather like in assemblies, or is this going to be a classroom-to-classroom type of a...
Dr. Pearson has already done an assembly with the upper school students, and will be working on a smaller level with some of the classes, and even one-on-one with some of the advanced composition students that we have here. So he's a variety of different responsibilities during the
Now that we've talked all around you, Dr. Pearson, now we're going to get to you. What do you hope is accomplished during your stay here at Liggett?
Well, before I answer your question totally, I just wanted to say it seems almost like deja vu to be speaking with you here. I saw your lovely interview with my mother a few months ago.
He's not only a musician, composer, but a diplomat. More power to you.
And it seems as though I've seen your wonderful presentation. To answer your question, what I hope to accomplish with the students, the idea is to try to gear my presentation on a number of fronts. I'm hoping on one thing to present the idea, the viable idea of becoming a composer within a context that will mean something to them in terms of their career projections, their career goals, and so forth. And at the same time, to be developing, working with them on specific musical skills, the ones that do have it. I must say, I am very happy to see the progress that has been made in the arts at the University Liggett School. The new arts complex is incredible. And when I was here, there was nothing of the kind. Going into the arts was seen as some kind of peripheral activity. And it seems now that there is a bit more thrust in this direction now.
Oh, that's satisfying then from your standpoint.
It's a beautiful wing to see it.
Jim Homeyer, I've known you for so many years, and I know that music has always played, and I was going to use this wonderful pun, a major chord in your life, and I thought, stay away from that. In addition to your responsibilities at Liggett, what other musical pursuits do you follow?
I'm the conductor of the Lake St. Clair Symphony Orchestra and the Rochester Symphony Orchestra, and those are my two major musical activities outside of my principal responsibility here at University Liggett School. In fact, if you would like me to mention, Dr. Pearson's world premiere of Manhattan Plaza Suite, that's the correct title of the show.
That is correct.
The Manhattan Plaza Suite will be presented Saturday with the Lake St. Clair Symphony Orchestra. That's April 8th at Lakeview High School at 8 o'clock. And I'm looking forward to it. The musicians are looking forward to it, and it's going to be an exciting event.
This piece is written specifically for Jim Homeyer to conduct, and I have not yet heard it myself, so I'm looking forward.
Did you give him a copy of the manuscript with your signature scrawled across it?
Well, it is probably in pretty much that condition at present.
It is scrawled.
And we're going to keep it that way until the performance, because I think composers always like to change the material.
Oh, I thought you were going to say it's going to stay in that scrawled state, because if something goes wrong, you can always say they didn't read the music right.
The parts are pretty clear.
Oh, all right. What started you on music? I guess for both of you. Jim, why don't you address that first?
As children grow up, they end up emulating parents. And as you know, Johanna, my father is an organist. If you didn't know in the audience, Johanna used to sing with my father. And I decided that was something that I thought was neat. My mother's a violinist. In fact, my mother still plays in one of the orchestra I conduct. And
as the son grows up, if it wants to become as the father, and that's the way it went with me. So I enjoy music, and I think I will continue to enjoy music.
Now, was your family very musical?
Well, not in the sense of being involved in classical music. This is pretty much something that I discovered myself. At probably age of 13 or sooner. I remember as a 13-year-old going into record bins and discovering the music of Beethoven. And I don't know, I'd heard the name Beethoven. I was interested in finding out what this would be like. And I put it on, and immediately I related to it. And I've been playing that music ever since.
How do you compose, Dr. Pearson? Is it, I mean, would you call yourself in the classic tradition, or are you more in the modern idiom?
Well, and let me put it this way. I try to write music that people can understand and that's accessible to them and that's based upon previous understandings of earlier musics. And in that respect, I suppose I would not be considered a hyper-modernist. I'm a pragmatist. And I think particularly in the case of this Manhattan Plaza Suite, I wrote this specifically for an orchestra so that it would be readily communicatable, I hope, to the audience. And I wrote it in such a way that it would not be overly difficult for an orchestra of this capacity. I suppose if I were writing for the Chicago Symphony or even more, the American Composers Orchestra, which is the premier's hyper-modern new works in New York, I might have written it somewhat differently.
I find that interesting that you say you realize not everyone is to the point of understanding music as you are. Because we had an earlier discussion where an American composer, Ezra Latterman, really suffered defeat, if you can say, when he wrote something that was very appealing to his peers.
This is a very poignant and perceptive question, and it's a problem that we're addressing in the contemporary music world today, in that there is considerable peer pressure. It comes to great degrees from universities and from prize-winning committees and so forth, to still write a very complicated style of music that's only understood by a peer group of composers. And the audience at large has not related greatly to this kind of music, and there's some question as to whether it ever will. Composers now are doubting that, and I think you will see a tendency to strive for a greater simplicity and toward a greater direct communication in the future. And I think there is more of an artistic license now for people like myself to experiment in this direction and to write music that I hope will grab the listener and be able to escort him, as it were, up the path of Parnassus or whatever to a greater understanding and a more complicated music without just bewildering him from the onset.
So that he has he or she has an opportunity to learn and to gain a knowledge.
Exactly. So this educational, this didactic concept of writing a piece of music, I think is important. And what happens, unfortunately, is people sometimes, composers, they get ensconced in academia and they are not played that frequently. A lot of the music is not performed for a live audience.
It's performed just for this peer group.
Yes.
And is that it?
Indeed.
You know, I've often wondered, since my experience in music has been singing, so the notes are available and I learn the piece, and the process of me that goes into the performance of the piece is the interpretation. Not only how the composer's marks are given on the page, but also how it kind of evolves through me. But how does a composer get his ideas?
Well, this is something, the idea of performance is something that I must make one side point on that's very important. The concept during the early 60s and maybe late 50s, in fact, was that the performer should have no latitude of interpretation. People like Stravinsky and Arnold Schoenberg, for example, felt the performer should have no latitude for doing anything but specifically realize the written notation on the page. Fortunately, I believe this has changed because there is no interest, I would think, in being a performer if you can't express something of yourself.
Well, it becomes a stilted performance. I think if you were just so bound by every little marking as opposed to taking the song in its total context.
Indeed. So I even frequently now write approximate metronome markings even within a range to allow for that freedom of conducting.
That's interesting. Okay, let's get back to the, how do you, I mean, does an idea just pop into your mind, or do you hear a chord and think, now that's the beginning of a composition, or is there a process? Do you sit at the piano and just play like on a regular basis just to see if anything comes of it?
Well, I do anyway, because I improvise frequently as the way I make a living in New York, and I also play the classics regularly. And perhaps that's why I can connect in so readily with the classical repertoire and with the past, because I'm involved with this music on a day-by-day basis, playing in ballet academies, other places, as a freelance performer, pianist. So I think that's important, and I'm sure that has an effect on my compositional style. As far as my actual working method, yes, I do work at the piano. Many composers do work at the piano, and I enjoy working at the piano. Although I have noticed I do have the facility somehow, I don't know, maybe everyone has this, but I have the ability to listen to music, and then I find that maybe 2 days later, this music is very vivid in my memory, almost like I'm hearing it again. And I feel that in my subconscious, I'm going through some kind of process that is digesting, almost like you digest a meal a couple days later. It comes out of nowhere. I mean, I've heard a lot of music since then. It's 2 days before or so that suddenly it comes and I've heard it, just like it's being performed by an orchestra or whatever.
Now, in the second process, are you more or less analyzing the music, as it were, or are you just listening to it?
Well, when I start composing, I advocate, and I've been discussing this with the students here, a process of sketching as being very